In this world, every fighter is ranked from third-rate to transcendent. A ladder of power with a place for everyone. Then something walks out of the frozen wastelands that the ladder has no rung for.
Ketal was an ordinary office worker who prayed to be reborn in a fantasy world and woke up inside the body of a 3-meter barbarian.
Now he's finally out of the tutorial that trapped him for years. And this walking apocalypse wants exactly one thing: to sightsee.
Sword masters
Can't rank him.
gods and places.
No one can decide if he's a man or something, only pretending to be one. This is Barbarian's Adventure in a fantasy world.
Our boy Ketal throws a glowing purple punch so wide the Elven Queen's whole court has to update their disaster response policy mid-battle. An old elf swordsman reports that Her Majesty struck the barbarian directly and he remains unharmed, an outcome the system's rules should not permit. He picked the worst class in the game and broke it anyway. Tanks at Transcendent's blast, apologizes for the crater, then asks if they can keep talking. Rewind, he only came to return a lost elf kid and make a good first impression, which is why he now looks genuinely hurt that everyone wants him dead. So Queen Marcellia calls diplomacy off and plays her ace, a highest grade fire spirit, horns of pure flame, mana enough to rattle the screen. And Ketal, fresh off being called a monster, looks up at the roaring fireball like a kid seeing his first holo TG pull. So before anyone knew his name, the White Snowfield was already running a reputation campaign, glacier-eating serpent, earthquake-causing bear, and a general vibe of, do not schedule your vacation here. The opening flash-forward is doing a lot of heavy lifting, an old king clutching his crown while 3 towering silhouettes, including one very tall man with shaggy white hair and glowing purple eyes, stare at him from a blizzard. Cut to the tutorial. Ketal, 3 meters of ashen gray muscle with glowing purple eyes, leaps into a monster in the snowfield. He slices a giant scorpion in half with purple energy. He takes hits, kneels in the snow, and keeps fighting through the wasteland. The lull is where it gets weird. One of his tribal companions bites into a forbidden monster part that is leaking green slime, and the others are alarmed in that specific way where you already know this is going to be a problem. The companion collapses, screaming and foaming at the mouth. The group shouts for Greta to hold on. This is the first mention of Greta. And here's the emotional thesis of the entire episode. A full-page montage of Ketal's prior life as a modern Korean office worker who climbed Everest, reached the planet's core, and traveled to Earth's southernmost point. This is not a man who wanted power. This is a man who wanted to see impossible things, and the universe responded by making him one of the impossible things. Cut to the present. A horse-drawn carriage escorted by hooded guards is crossing the same deadly wasteland, and the guards are having a very normal conversation about how this job is absolute madness. Inside the carriage, an elderly monocly retainer checks on his mistress, and a young noblewoman with long light blue hair and a star-shaped golden pendant answers with the calmest smile on the continent. This is Melina Akasha. Melina is worried enough about her guards freezing outside that she suggests bringing them in, which is a nice touch from the woman who is currently risking all of their lives on a weapons deal. Melina flashes back to the old legend. An emperor led an army into the wasteland, came back alone and broken, and was dismissed as a madman, except many of the monsters he described turned out to be real. A courtier smugly points out that despite the legend, nobody has ever actually sighted a barbarian, and Melina agrees, just in time for the present day to make her regret that sentence. Back in the blizzard, the guards suddenly stop. Something is wrong. The captain demands answers, and the panel gives us exactly one silhouette of a very large person standing very still in the snow. Then Ketal steps into frame, 3 meters tall, ashen gray skin, white shaggy hair, diagonal scar across his bare chest, and purple energy crackling off him like his body is running an unlicensed graphics mod. The guards, the youth, Melina, and her retainer all freeze and stare at the creature blocking the road. An on-panel title card gives his formal name, Ashen Barbarian Ketal. He greets the guards and confirms they are the caravan's hired escort. Ketal immediately senses Melina hiding inside the carriage and calls it out, which upgrades the guard's panic from hostile monster to hostile monster with extrasensory perception. Ask if he is hostile. Ketal smirks and says that if he were, the whole caravan would already be dead, a negotiation tactic that is technically honest and emotionally devastating. The captain reports to Melina that the barbarian wants to be hired as a mercenary. Ketal states his terms, and Melina goes silent because this is either the best or worst business opportunity of her life. Ketal reacts to being hired with visible satisfaction, then immediately looms over one of the guards and reminds him that he is, quote, just the hired help, establishing a pecking order that did not need establishing. A young guard argues they should try to stop whatever is happening because they are professional mercenaries. Ketal dismisses the idea, while Melina's retainer begs her to stay calm as she does something unexpected. Melina, shaken but resolute, gives her decisive agreement, shocking her retainers, and Ketal looks up into the snowy sky with a satisfied smile as the chapter closes on his glowing purple eyes. The Ashen Barbarian steps into the fantasy world. He smiles. The captain asks whether Ketal is hostile. Ketal replies that if he were, they would all already be dead. The guards' faces do that thing where your brain tries to reboot, but the operating system is already on fire. The captain just stands there processing the sales pitch that doubled as a casualty estimate. Inside the carriage, Melina Akasha says yes to the void. One syllable, no inflection, and somehow it sounds like she just bought a dragon on installment. Melina asks what is happening. She is a debt-strapped heiress, and she needs a moment to process that her day has turned mythological. The captain reports the situation with the energy of a man reading his own obituary. The barbarian wants to be hired as a mercenary. Melina sweats. The universe, presumably, takes notes. Ketal adds that he wants to speak personally. He is a 3-meter mythological figure, yet he insists on a face-to-face meeting. Melina goes quiet again, and her silence shows she is calculating. The captain finally relents and says, "Very well then." The words carry the weight of surrender. Ketal steps forward, and the snow settles under his weight. Lined up behind the captain is the entire hired company. Among them stands a white-bearded mercenary in a green cloak. The captions identify him as Swordmaster Kane. He is not Kane. Kane has not appeared yet. Ketal lies back in the snow with the satisfaction of a man who just closed a deal, then announces the great news to the guards like he is their new regional manager. Then he looms over the captain and tells him to relax. He's just the hired help. This is peak main character privilege. The job applicant already demoted the interviewer. A guard warns Ketal that he will regret it if he tries anything. The threat ignores the imbalance of power in the negotiation. Ketal only smiles. The young guard insists that they are mercenaries and should stop Ketal somehow. His statement ignores every observable fact in front of him. Ketal dismisses it as ridiculous, with the weariness of a man who has already won the argument in 3 alternate timelines. He's not even looking at the guard anymore. Inside the carriage, Melina's retainer begs her to stay calm. Melina then does something her retainers are not prepared for. The retainer's monocle reflects his alarm. Melina, shaken but calculating, gives her decisive yes. Her retainers react like she just volunteered them for a ritual. The chapter closes on Ketal looking up at the sky with a satisfied smile and glowing purple eyes. A man who got the job, the raise, and the existential dread of everyone in hours. Chapter 2 opens inside the carriage, where Melina formally receives Ketal, as he reclines on a couch like this is a therapy session and not a hostage negotiation with a legend. The retainer screams at Ketal not to lie to him. He takes a bold tone with a client strong enough to kill him. Melina stares at Ketal. A barbarian from the legends stands right in front of her. Melina pulls herself together and says the pleasure is mine, which is the most corporate thing anyone has ever said to a 3-meter myth. Ketal immediately notices the room is surprisingly warm and starts asking about the magic like a tourist who just discovered central heating. He realizes it really is magic, and the genuine delight on his face is doing irreparable damage to the barbarian brand. This man did not isekai into a fantasy world to conquer it. He isekai'd to ask questions about the feedback system. Then Ketal gets serious. The chances of her crossing safely with those mercenaries are slim, so he's naming his own price. He has one condition, and Melina, trying to stay calm, asks what exactly he wants. Ketal states a condition. The retainer asks what it is. Ketal waits. Melina waits. The panel shows Ketal's smile, which could signal either a business clause or a blood oath. Ketal states his price with his arms crossed and the confidence of a man who has never read a contract he didn't write. He just wants knowledge of the world beyond these snowfields. He assures her it's not a bad deal, which is hilarious because he's the one who just invented it. Melina realizes she has no real choice and agrees to the terms. Ketal remains polite enough to let her maintain the pretense that she had one. Ketal asks for her name, and the retainer behind him continues to have the worst day of his life. Melina answers as a noble of House Akasha, and just like that, the Ashen Barbarian has a client, a retainer, and a very nervous audience. The world runs on a 5-tier power spreadsheet, and the narrator is legally required to make fun of it. Third rate can sense the mystery, second rate can use it, first rate turns it into aura or mana. Transcendents split heavens and earth, and heroes influence the world itself. It is clean, it is elegant, and our protagonist is about to arrive at the DMV without a social security number. We pick back up with Ketal accepting the gig, arms crossed, smiling like a man who has already decided this retainer contract is going on his resume. He tells Melina he looks forward to working with her, which is the most threateningly professional sentence a barbarian has ever said in a moving vehicle. The flashback shows a desk cluttered with game cases titled The Fantasy World. Ketal was a Korean office worker who spent his evenings praying to every god he could contact. The system answered by dropping him into a frozen wasteland with a tribe and a to-do list that never ends. He led them, hunted with them, and held on against monsters the rest of the world thinks are bedtime stories. The visual is Ketal reaching toward the viewer with glowing purple eyes and a diagonal scar across his chest, looking like a patch note that became sentient and started asking for overtime pay. The system notification reads, "Quest incomplete. You can leave the snowfield upon quest completion. There is no exit code, no estimated time, and no support. He must survive until the quest ends." He stands on a cliff, looks out at a green valley with an actual castle in the distance, and the caption drops the most earnest line in the chapter, "A fantasy world." The man is seeing grass for the first time in years, and it is hitting him like a comeback stage. The system immediately assigns him Quest 295, Hunt the Lizard within the given time. He has already completed 294 prior quests. Now he faces the lizard. Ketal trampled monsters and cleared the quests one by one. The only alternative was to remain in the snow and wait for a response from the gods who had not answered him. Back in the carriage, he tells Melina that most humans he has met either drew their blades in panic or attacked outright. This is the first proper conversation he has had in a long time. Melina is the first person to speak with him at length. Melina is surprised he figured out the war context so fast, and Ketal looks at her like a man who has been reading quest logs for a living. The polite barbarian is also the smartest person in the wagon, and nobody is ready for that combination. Melina confirms the Empire and the Kingdom of Gehentra are at war, and that the border is held by a swordmaster and a hero. Ketal's ears perk up because those are exactly the prestige classes he wanted to see in the character select screen. He asks what a hero and a swordmaster actually do. Melina admits she has never been outside this region. He is getting his information from someone with limited knowledge, and he understands that. Now the full power system infographic lands. Third rate gets the hand glow and can sense the mystery. Second rate gets dual green swords and can actually use it. The ranks are a tidy ladder, and Ketal is standing next to the ladder asking if he can eat it. First rate covers knights, mages, and spirit summoners who manifest mystery as aura or mana. It is the common tier of supernatural ability, and most named characters remain at this level. Transcendents dominate mystery itself, and the visual gives us a swordmaster riding a spectral dragon because subtlety is dead. Heroes go beyond domination to influence the world, which is basically the final boss tier of the setting. Ketal says he cannot even remember how long he was trapped in the snowfield, and the line lands quietly because the man has been alone with monsters for so long that time stopped meaning anything. He looks out at the world beyond the barrier. The caption calls it the fantasy world, and he refuses to stay with a flat no. He is not asking permission, he is leaving, even if he has to punch the questgate himself. Back in the present, Melina asks Ketal directly whether he is a barbarian. Her phrasing indicates she wants the answer to be no. Ketal notes that judging by their reactions, humans already know he exists. Melina explains it is because of the legend, and Ketal is genuinely stunned that there is a legend about him. He thought the Emperor was just a madman. He laughs, says he assumed the Emperor was a madman, and the sheer delight on his face is doing irreparable damage to the barbarian brand. He is famous, and he is thrilled about it. Then Melina states her real motive. Gold coins appear across the panel as she explains that her family is heavily in debt. This merchant journey is a desperate attempt to prevent the Akasha house from collapsing. Ketal deduces she is planning to sell weapons to the kingdom at war with the Empire. Melina confirms it with a hesitant yes. He has stated her hidden plan aloud while sitting across from her in the carriage. She admits she is risking her life crossing the snowfield for exactly that, and someone internally asks the question everyone is thinking, is he really a barbarian? Because the political deduction just came from a man the legends describe as a walking avalanche. The carriage jolts to a halt. A purple slash tears through the frame, and Ketal looms over a monster sprawled on the floor, not, despite what the caption insists, a guy in a suit. The interview is over. The first combat encounter of the contract has begun, and the new hire is already clocking overtime. We are starting here because this is the exact frame where the fantasy world realizes its new tourist is not on the itinerary. Ketal stands in a blinding white void, back to us, facing something the size of a subway train, and his only complaint is that the snake gave him orders. He clenches his fist, purple eyes ignite, and the caption might as well read, "Boss music begins, but for the boss." The line itself is the hook. He was promised immutability, and now an ancient serpent is ordering him to return to duty. The recap will return to how a barbarian ended up threatening a dragon, but first, the slime. Back at the caravan, a red-headed horror and a purple slime the size of a studio apartment erupt from the snowfield, and the guards immediately start reconsidering their career choices. Melina, trembling, confirms this thing is documented in the old records, then asks Ketal if he knows about it. Ketal thoughtfully replies that black slimes are chewy, surprisingly edible, and make decent snacks, which is not the threat assessment anyone was hoping for. The slime lashes out and strikes Ketal with a blade-like appendage. Melina shouts his name. Ketal stands motionless, waiting. Then Ketal drops the formal honorific and says the single word, danger. Not because he is in danger, but because he needs to assess the outside world's current level. This fight is not survival for him, it is a benchmark test, and he's the only one who brought a stopwatch. The guard captain shouts, "Shield!" The party braces. The slime detonates across the front line in a burst of purple mass. Ketal gets thrown back, a staff-wielding mercenary eats the blast, and the whole formation scatters because nobody read the slime's patch notes. Then the captain earns his salary. He calls out that black slimes only move in straight lines, orders the group to scatter and coordinate, and suddenly this is a strategy game. The party kites, slashes, and baits the slime into predictable paths. The slime shrieks. Purple energy spreads across the battlefield. A purple-clad voice warns that simple attacks will not work. The captain spots the hidden core, and the whole squad zeroes in like a raid team that finally found the weak point. Blades clash. A green-cloaked mercenary channels the final strike, and the red crystalline core shatters in slow motion while the panel holds its breath. A guard screams "Re1," Melina exhales in visible relief, and for exactly 3 seconds the party is allowed to feel competent. Then a massive white wolf crashes the victory screen, fangs first, and the hooded youth barely parries while a shield bearer gets introduced to the concept of momentum. The wolf tears through the line. Snow erupts. A soldier says the white snowfield is worse than the rumors. A skeptical guard tries to hand-wave it all as Emperor Legends, while a younger mercenary insists they are risking their lives because they have a contract, and that is what professionals do. Melina quietly admits to the captain that everyone else ran the moment they heard the job details, and without this crew she could not have attempted the crossing at all. A guard reports he tried and failed to stop something. Ketal says he does not mind, but it is not possible right now, and the temperature drops about 40 degrees. A new voice rolls in like bad weather. The frail mortals outside have arrived, followed by a massive scaled maw and the charming request, "Bark for me, mortals." Melina screams, the guards buckle under pressure, and Ketal steps in front of the caravan and tells the serpent these people are his guests, so it can go back where it came from. The white dragon recognizes him and demands to know why he defies the ancient laws of the snowfield, as if Ketal has ever read a terms of service agreement in his life. Ketal answers by powering up and roaring back that he was promised immutability, a phrase that implies the system gave him a status buff, so high it came with a contractual clause. The clash goes off like a star dying. Blue and white energy ripples across the snowfield, the serpent lunges, and Ketal meets it head-on without a weapon in sight. The dragon screams, Melina recoils inside the carriage, and the fight peaks with enough force to make the earlier slime battle look like a tutorial pop quiz. Melina calls out an alarm, and Ketal calmly tells her he will finish cleaning up and be right there, then descends through a violent purple aura like a man late for dinner. His purple eyes lock onto the serpent. The final strike lands, and the so-called ancient law of the snowfield starts begging for its life. The dragon confesses it has committed a sin worthy of death and pleads to be spared, and Ketal, now seated calmly, tells the nervous guards it is only natural not to trust a stranger easily. Afterward, Ketal asks Melina why she personally risked this journey, and the answer arrives in a flashback. Her mother was a concubine used in a political marriage and abandoned without power. Melina regrets revealing that much, but Ketal has already connected the dots. The Akasha trading house is broke, and her real goal is to seize control of the family as a concubine's daughter fighting for the inheritance. They discuss logistics. Once she sells the weapons, she will travel empty-handed back through the Empire, and Ketal offers to help her pass safely, because apparently his contract now includes vacation planning. A mysterious gray-haired man watches from the side and makes his own recruitment pitch, while Melina privately covets the power Ketal just displayed against a dragon. As the caravan departs, Melina hands Ketal her family's star-shaped golden pendant and tells him to show it to House Akasha if he visits. And standing alone in the snow, watching the carriage pull away, is the same white-haired, white-bearded mercenary in the green cloak who fought at Ketal's side against the slime and the serpent. Not a new mystery man, just one more guard from this caravan, though the captions keep trying to promote him to Swordmaster Kane a solid 11 chapters early. So the Ashen Barbarian has stepped into the fantasy world, punched a dragon into an apology, and collected his first client and his first quest token. No unexplained watcher required. Just the same green-cloaked guard who's been standing around since Chapter 1, all before lunch. We rejoin the story in the aftermath of a snowfield dragon learning what happens when you talk down to a tourist who has already read the patch notes. Melina is still processing the fact that her new hire just bench-pressed a white dragon, and Ketal asks the question that shifts the whole scene from Monster of the Week to actual character work. He wants to know why a noble heiress is personally riding a weapons caravan through a wasteland that eats mercenaries for breakfast. The answer arrives in a flashback that the narrator is going to let breathe. Melina's mother was a concubine, used in a political marriage, then abandoned without power, unable to protect her own child. Melina immediately regrets showing that much of herself to a stranger, but the damage is done. Ketal has already connected the lineage dots she was trying to keep hidden behind her smile. Ketal's face does the thing where a man who has spent years talking to snow monsters finally understands a human political diagram, and the realization lands like a dropped anvil. They move on to logistics. Once Melina sells the weapons, she will be traveling back through the Empire empty-handed, and Ketal offers to help her pass safely. His contract now includes escorting her through the return journey. The real picture comes into focus. The Akasha trading house is broke, and Melina is a concubine's daughter trying to seize control of her own family before it collapses under someone else's management. A mysterious gray-haired man watches from the sidelines and makes his own recruitment pitch, while Melina privately looks at Ketal like he is the single most useful asset she has ever accidentally acquired. As the caravan departs, Melina hands Ketal her family's star-shaped golden pendant and tells him to show it to House Akasha if he ever visits, which is either a token of trust or the most expensive business card in the kingdom. Ketal accepts the token. Her retainer thanks him with a formal bow and chooses not to question what just occurred. Left alone, Ketal stands in a luminous landscape and reflects that he has finally reached the fantasy world he spent his prior life praying for. Magic, swords, dragons, elves, the whole itinerary. Cut ahead 5 years and 784 completed quests. Yes, that's the actual number. No, we're not doing the math. And our boy finally takes a deep breath of grass, beast, and river, then shouts a farewell to the snowfield that was basically his unpaid internship from hell. He is not walking toward a quest marker. He is walking toward every fantasy trope he ever read about, and the man is visibly thrilled to be alive for it. Ketal spots a village in the distance. He is visibly relieved at the prospect of reaching civilization. He then remembers the ordinary human villagers he already met, who just blinked at him in confusion, and admits that he deeply misses a properly structured human village with NPCs who know their lines. He resolves to be gentlemanly about whatever comes next, then immediately spots actual elf villagers, and the fantasy world fanboy in him briefly overrides every survival instinct he spent years sharpening. A flashback shows the elves settling into this hidden forest home, unpacking and cheering while an elder reassures a worried elf that the location is genuinely safe. The elder explains the barrier that hides them, ancient methods, months of work. It obscures their presence, makes the village look like ordinary forest, and supposedly keeps outsiders from ever approaching. An elf credits their safety to Her Majesty the Queen. Ketal, unaware of this, continues walking and wonders how much farther civilization is. Ketal senses movement nearby. The panel reveals a lost elf child who freezes at the sight of him. He realizes it is an elf, and the man who just fought a dragon is now grinning like he won a fan meat lottery, because elves are one of the most iconic races of any fantasy world, and he finally gets to see one. The child faints before Ketal can speak to her. He picks her up and carries her toward the village. He carries the sleeping child straight through the supposedly impenetrable barrier into the elf village, and a parent recognizes her and screams, because the universe has just delivered a 3-meter babysitter through their front door. An elf reports a crack in the barrier and asks where the queen is. Someone else says she is away on patrol, and Ketal insists he is not their enemy, while another elf threatens to hunt him down if he does not return the child. Ketal gently sets the trembling child down and tells her to go back to her people, which is the most peaceful hostage return in fantasy history, but the elves are not exactly taking it well. He declares he returned the child and means no harm, and an elder announces the hostage's release, which sounds like de-escalation until an elf archer immediately shouts, "Everyone, attack," and the chapter ends under a hail of arrows. And here it is, the hero shot of the act. Ketal the Ashen Barbarian, walking straight through a magical barrier that took the elves months to build, holding a sleeping elf child like she's a delivery package he forgot to scan. Rewind a few minutes. Ketal leaves the snowfield and reaches an area of grass and rivers. He spots a village in the distance. He finds a lost elf child crying in the woods. His sighs and glowing eyes make him unable to reassure her. The child looks at Ketal, does not understand what he is, and faints before he can speak. Ketal picks her up and carries her toward the village to return her. He does not realize the elves will see this as an abduction. He strolls right into the hidden elf village, through a barrier that was supposed to make the place invisible to outsiders, and a mother immediately recognizes her daughter and starts screaming. An elder reports a crack in the barrier. Someone asks where the queen is, and Ketal stands there holding the kid like a man trying to return a library book while the library is on fire. He gently sets the trembling child down and tells her to return to her people. He means her no harm. Ketal looks around and asks aloud whether his face is truly frightening. He thought he looked acceptable in the snowfield. He announces that he has returned the child and means no harm. An elder shouts that the hostage has been released. Then an archer screams for everyone to attack. The chapter ends with a sky full of arrows coming down on him, and if you have ever wondered how elves say, "We do not negotiate," this is the visual dictionary. Chapter 6 opens with the narrator stating that elves are usually gentle nature lovers, but these elves are violent because they live in the wild. The elves shoot arrows at Ketal and the arrows fail to harm him. Ketal tells himself to stay calm, reaches up like he's catching rain, and unleashes a purple energy blast that rewrites the local geography. Elves go flying, someone screams to deploy the barrier, and Ketal stands in the crater he just made like a man who accidentally stepped on a Lego city. An elder asks what Ketal is. Still in the crater, Ketal insists he is not their enemy. This is true, but it is not the impression he wanted to make. He even apologizes for maybe failing to control his strength right before a fire projectile explodes nearby because the elves are not accepting returns today. Then the queen arrives, blonde, circlet-wearing, and immediately demanding to know what is going on, while an archer mutters that even this hidden village is not safe anymore. Ketal picks up a massive weapon, holds it up casually, and tells the elves he would appreciate it if they listened, and Marcelia Hacian Carusia, the elven queen, reacts like someone just found a bug in reality. An elder cries out that Ketal is unharmed after taking a direct attack from Her Majesty. Marcelia realizes that even someone this powerful is targeting them. An archer fires a flaming arrow and accuses Ketal of greed. Ketal stands there, unsure whether she cannot understand him or whether human-elf communication has simply failed. The fight escalates into a blue energy monster roaring at him, and Ketal answers by punching straight through it. No sword, no spell, just barbarian geometry. He keeps throwing punches that detonate like patch notes for a god tier, and Marcelia watches in stunned silence because her kingdom's threat model did not include this. When the fight ends, an exhausted elf woman is on the ground. Ketal touches his own cheek, checking whether it was burned. An armored onlooker finally says what everyone is thinking. Ketal is powerful, at least above the level of a Transcendent, and nobody knows why someone that strong is here. Marcelia orders everyone to flee, then turns back and tells Ketal she acknowledges his strength, but he will never accomplish his goal here. Ketal protests that he was just trying to talk and that this has gone completely sideways, which is the understatement of the arc, while Marcelia begins a summoning ritual. She calls out to a being with horns of pure flame, and Piego, a highest-grade fire spirit, a literal bull made of fire, manifests in front of Ketal. Piego complains that contracts are not worth the trouble. Marcelia commands him to fulfill it, and the fire bull sighs and asks if he just has to kill the human in front of him. Then Piego pauses, senses something off about Ketal, and Ketal grins back with glowing purple eyes, and an onlooker asks the question that is becoming the series' thesis: is that even human? Here's the hero shot the director wanted: Marcelia Haciane Carusia, the Elven Queen, agreeing to hand Ketal the secret location of the Elven Holy Land, Elfo Sagrado, while Melina Akasha watches like an elf researcher who just won the lottery. The Ashen Barbarian has barely introduced himself and already has an appointment at the one place no human ruler has ever found. But first, we have to get through Piego. The highest-grade fire spirit bursts out of Marcelia's summon circle like a bull made of unpaid overtime and immediately tells Ketal that a pathetic human has no business coveting the races of nature. Ketal stares back, not understanding. Then he and the elf start exchanging explosive spells across the forest clearing, and the trees around them burn and fall. Shockwaves throw a nearby elf backward. Marcelia flinches behind her circlet, and Ketal decides the best diplomatic move is to leap through the air and grab the fireball by the tail. punches detonate like patch notes for a god tier. The ground splits, the trees reconsider their life choices, and somewhere in the wreckage, the local flora is filing for hazard pay. By the time the dust settles, the elves are kneeling in a crater that now belongs to Ketal's real estate portfolio. An onlooker mutters that this cannot be real, and an elf woman begs him to spare her kin, which is a big tonal shift from shooting arrows at him 30 seconds ago. The argument continues off-panel. When it resumes, the elves have accepted that Ketal was not their enemy. One elf bows and apologizes for mistaking the man who returned their child for a kidnapper. Ketal is a little hurt that nobody gave him a chance to explain, then reveals this was his first time ever seeing an elf because the White Wasteland does not stock them. The elves, understandably, ask if he is really not one of the humans chasing them. Ketal tells them that outsiders call him the Ashen Barbarian of the Wasteland, and the elves look at him like he just admitted he summered in an active volcano. They cannot believe a human survived the White Wasteland, let alone walked out of it. They ask if others could leave the barrier too. Ketal says he doubts it. He only escaped because his system treated their barrier like a quest objective, and that exception does not apply to everyone else. Marcelia casually checks whether her summoned fire spirit is okay, and Piega responds with the energy of a Wi-Fi router that just survived a lightning strike. The bowl made of fire is fine. Irritated, but fine. Marcelia apologizes for being rude and offers Ketal any request he wants. So he asks the only question a tourist would ask: can beings other than elves make contracts with spirits? She says only those with deep nature affinity can, which rules him out, until she mentions Elfo Sagrado, the holy land of all elves. Marcelia agrees to tell him where Elfo Sagrado is, but only in secret, and Melina, who has apparently been taking notes this whole time, calls it the dream destination of every elf researcher. Ketal just got handed a ticket to the Fantasy World theme park nobody else can find. Formal introductions follow. Marcelia states her full name, Marcelia Hassiani Carusia, then asks the obvious follow-up herself. Ketal smiles and answers, Ketal the Barbarian, and that is the exact moment the universe decides to interrupt. An explosive clash erupts out of nowhere and throws Ketal backward. He lunges back in, purple eyes lit as a small dark-haired silhouette streaks down through the forest canopy trailing blue energy, and no, it is not another elf. The scene cuts to the border of the Varkan territory in the kingdom of Gehentra, where guards are panicking because something is approaching their wall. They do not know what. We do not know what. The episode is about to find out together. Through the dust strides a muscular, dark-haired man who is clearly not Ketal, while armored soldiers recoil in shock and fear. The Ashen Barbarian just stepped into the fantasy world, and the fantasy world is already sending its next mystery guest to the door. Here is the hero shot the director wanted: Ketal, Hayes, Alessandro Tyrannus, and Kassan standing at the dungeon threshold like the world's most dysfunctional raid party. But we have to back up, because this group did not form organically. They were assembled by a border guard who looked at Ketal and saw a legend he did not want to believe. Ketal reappears just outside the kingdom of Gantra. The guards spot his ash-gray skin and white shaggy hair. Their expressions show they recognize the old emperor's legend and are alarmed. Then one guard spots the diagonal scar across Ketal's bare chest and actually says, "No way," out loud, which is the correct response but not the professional one. They block the gate and tell him not to come closer. Ketal points forward with the patience of a man who has already waited years for this conversation. Then, in the chaos over something called the wall, he is suddenly standing just beyond it, looking surprised that everyone else is surprised. Indoors, Ketal asks if he can stay for an uncertain length of time. The official asks for his name. Ketal gives it plainly. Ketal has no identification. The white snowfield issues none. Melina Akasha steps in and hands him her family's golden star-shaped pendant, instructing him to show it at House Akasha if he visits. The officials examine the pendant and note that House Akasha has been climbing the power ladder since a new head took over, but they still cannot confirm it is genuine on sight. The guard captain, dark-skinned hand on the table, sets a condition. The condition is to clear a nearby dungeon with other outsiders whose identities are also unclear. Ketal accepts immediately, resting his chin on his hand and calling it easier than expected. This man has been soloing a frozen hell for years. A dungeon with 3 strangers is basically a group tour. A guard asks if he is really a barbarian, because Ketal's calm demeanor is not matching the brochure. Ketal crosses his arms and firmly declares, "I am a barbarian." The delivery is so confident it almost convinces the room that barbarians are known for their paperwork skills. Now meet the other outsiders. First up, Alessandra Tyrannus, a self-proclaimed paladin in white plate armor who is currently bickering with Kasan, a dark-haired thief in a blue cloak with a white shoulder cauldron. The grudge is about an old scam. Alessandra was furious that a petty thief would insult a paladin. Kasan smirks and asks what kind of dumbass surname Tyrannus even is. The tension is less party-forming and more mandatory workplace harassment seminar. Kasan and Alessandra draw blades and clash in the middle of the room. Kasan's blade drips with green venom. Alessandra's honor is provoked past restraint. Hayes, a cleric in a nun's habit, enters. She sighs that she must raid a dungeon with this group and openly questions whether it will be manageable. She has already assessed that this party cannot communicate healthfully. A dungeon party requires 4 members minimum. A soldier announces the final arrival. The final member is the 3-meter ash-skinned figure they had hoped was only a rumor. Ketal enters the room, his purple eyes glowing. The assembled group reacts with visible fear. Anxiety floods the room. Ketal asks the group if they are his party members. Hayes, sweating, asks aloud whether he is human because the pressure he emits is not that of a visitor. Ketal laughs, pleased to finally have teammates. Ketal steps up briefly, then returns looking down smugly at a stammering, dark-haired party member. He has already established the pecking order, without doing anything threatening, which is somehow more threatening. Formal introductions begin. Alessandro Tyrannus states he is a paladin, then admits he cannot actually use holy power, which is the worst paladin sales pitch in recorded history. Hayes introduces herself as a cleric of Calosia, and Ketal is unbothered. Hayes reveals that Calosia is the god of lies and deceit, and is therefore poorly regarded, bracing for rejection. Ketal responds with a simple greeting. He has been socializing with snowfield monsters, so a cleric of the lying god is acceptable company. And then, because this group cannot go 5 minutes without a scuffle, weapons are drawn again. The party has not even left the building and already has more internal conflict than most guilds manage in a year. After the scuffle settles, Hayes looks at the group with an exhausted expression. The others remain wary and bruised, but stay in the room. They arrive at the dungeon entrance, where a lone armored knight waits on the path like the final boss of orientation day. A hooded figure announces that they have arrived, and the real test begins. And here we are again, Ketal, Hayes, Alessandro, and Kasan standing at the dungeon threshold, fully formed and fully dysfunctional. The Ashen Barbarian has assembled his first party, and the dungeon is the least dangerous thing in the frame. At the dungeon mouth, the party assigns roles. The thief will check for traps. Hayes will support from the rear. The 4 of them pose together against a golden explosion. Ketal confirms the plan with the enthusiasm of a man who has never had a party before. The thief laughs nervously. Alessandro looks grim. Hayes looks like she is already drafting her resignation letter. They move out. Inside the pitch-dark dungeon, Hayes notes she cannot see any of the usual traps. Kasan, masked and suspicious, says the place looks suspiciously normal. That is the dungeon equivalent of a horror movie character saying, "I'll go check it out." Kasan suddenly halts the group. He senses monsters ahead, then privately realizes the guard captain knew from the start. This dungeon is not for verifying identities. It is for disposing of troublesome outsiders. The party has been volunteered for a death sentence. Ketal reacts to the word skeletons like a man hearing his favorite snack is on the menu. Kasan warns that skeletons are strong monsters with considerable bone defense, which is true for most parties and irrelevant for this one. Kasan orders Hayes to ready her powers, and signals Alessandro to raise his shield. He warns Ketal to be careful too. Ketal's expression shows he has been ready for a long time, but he acknowledges the thief's direction. Kasan explains the weak spot, the neck, because the body keeps moving even when damaged. Ketal listens, nods, then charges in to test the theory himself. The strategy meeting becomes a live-fire demonstration. Ketal cuts through the first skeleton before it can react. Bones scatter, The dungeon's difficulty rating already looks outdated. Ketal looks up, confirming the tutorial's assessment of him. Hayes channels a golden prayer aura while another skeleton lunges with glowing blue eyes. Ketal raises a hand and stops the blade. The skeleton's momentum dies instantly. Then Ketal unleashes a purple energy strike that turns the cavern into a light show. The blast shocks Alessandro, Kassan, and Hayes all at once, not because it is flashy, but because it is the wrong color, the wrong system, and the wrong amount of force for a barbarian. Ketal stands over the remains and casually observes that skeletons really do stop moving once you take their head off. He says it like he is reviewing a restaurant. The rest of the party is still processing that the fight lasted under a minute. Kassan laughs nervously and says that is not what he meant. The thief who has built his identity on doing his best to live now watches a man succeed by mere existence and quietly rethinks his choices. Kassan explains that skeletons must be felled by repeatedly striking the neck to sever the vertebrae. He marvels that Ketal is far stronger than he first appeared. The party quietly wonders if he is even human. Ketal looks down at two armored men explaining something very seriously. His expression shows he stopped listening 10 seconds ago. He has already moved on to the next problem. Ketal crushes a fallen skeleton's skull underfoot, then senses more skeletons approaching. He tells the party he will handle this batch alone because there is something he wants to test. The others defer immediately. Fast mode. Ketal smashes a skeletal warrior back with a surge of purple energy, then blocks its follow-up sword strike using only one finger. The skeleton is now the one having an existential crisis. Ketal taunts the skeleton for switching its sword to the other hand, sounding genuinely impressed by its intelligence. He is treating a dungeon monster like a sparring partner, and the dungeon is not enjoying the attention. He notes that the skeleton can even substitute parts, which shows unusually high intelligence. He finishes it off with a decisive blow. The fight ends with the opponent outmatched. Alessandro and Kassan watch in shock as Ketal effortlessly crushes the skeleton, muttering, "A true barbarian." They came in expecting a teammate and got a walking natural disaster with good manners. And in the wreckage, a skeletal figure grins with glowing purple eyes, because this dungeon apparently has more health bars than the party budgeted for. The Ashen Barbarian just started his first dungeon crawl, and the dungeon is already running out of tricks. Hero shot. Kassan's hand is on the lock, and behind him, Ketal watches with open, hopeful attention. Kassan can feel that gaze on his back. He knows that if he fails this, the man who just destroyed a dungeon may decide he is the next useless thing in the room. The story returns to how the barbarian broke this thief's confidence. First, the dungeon had to be reminded of who it was facing. The party steps deeper into the dark. Ketal smiles like a man who has finally been invited to someone else's birthday party and suggests, very politely, that they keep going. Hayes admits she cannot see the usual traps, and Kassan's thief senses flare a warning. The dungeon is suspiciously clean, which means danger. Ketal tells the group he will handle the next batch alone, and the paladin, the cleric, and the thief all agree with the enthusiasm of people who have just been offered a paid vacation. He thanks them and turns to face the next skeleton with focused, analytical interest. The rest of the party watches from a safe distance, unsure of his plan. Ketal looks down at the skeleton and asks how it is constructed. Fast mode. The skeleton lunges. Ketal answers with a purple energy slash that redecorates the cavern. The skeleton learns that its sword is not the problem in this equation. It tries a follow-up strike. Ketal blocks it with one finger. The dungeon's difficulty curve just flatlined. The skeleton swings wide. Ketal catches the blade on his forearm. Sparks fly, the cavern echoes, and the skeleton is driven back. Nearby, the skeleton's blade punches clean through a fallen body, a reminder that these things are genuinely lethal to people who are not Ketal. Ketal grins. The skeleton switches its sword to the other hand, and Ketal actually compliments it on the adaptation. He is giving combat feedback to an undead monster. It lunges for his chest. He repels it casually, leaving the skeleton surrounded by floating question marks. I have never seen a skeleton look confused before, and now I cannot unsee it. Ketal slams it down, seizes its arm mid-swing, and snaps the bones. The skeleton tries to substitute parts. and Ketal notes that its intelligence is high. Then he finishes the job. Alessandro and Kassan watch from the sidelines, muttering the words every power fantasy side character eventually has to say, a true barbarian. Hayes looks like she needs to sit down. Ketal, meanwhile, smiles and holds up a broken bone like it is a participation trophy. The dungeon has run out of polite things to say. But the wreckage is not finished. A skeletal figure grins through the dust, glowing purple eyes opening as a second threat the party had not prepared for. Ketal rejoins the group and apologizes for the delay. Kassan bows so deeply he almost folds in half, insisting it was no trouble at all, sir. Absolutely no trouble. They descend to the second floor. The party follows Ketal like ducklings following a bear, and Hayes responds to his every suggestion with the nervous energy of a new employee on day one. The second floor opens up around them. Ketal looks ahead with calm confidence, already prepared for whatever comes next. There is an awkward lull. The party is still processing that their supposed barbarian is also the group's philosopher, and nobody knows where to put that information. Ketal points out that this dungeon sits unusually close to inhabited territory, and Hayes admits that dangerous exceptions like this are normally identified and dealt with beforehand. The word normally carries weight. Kassan adds that dungeons are treated as a natural phenomenon, mostly manifesting near populated areas. Ketal asks if they ever appear inside settled territory, and is told they always keep a set distance. Ketal looks disappointed by the rule. The conversation shifts to rewards. A boss guards the final floor, and defeating it yields substantial loot. Ketal's ears perk up at the word rewards, like a tourist hearing about a free museum day. Then Ketal asks the question nobody else thought to ask. Who actually creates dungeons? Hayes answers plainly that no one does. The silence after that answer is the first real horror beat of the episode. Ketal presses the point. They manifest near settlements, demand to be explored, and always keep a polite distance from civilization. For a natural phenomenon, that feels far too deliberate. Hayes admits she never questioned it. Kassan agrees, sweating. The thief who prides himself on doing his best to live has just realized he never questioned the architecture of the death traps he raids for a living. Ketal stands over a wounded ally and says skeletons are cruel beings, devoid of blood or tears. Then he asks himself quietly whether everything he knows, including what a typical barbarian even is actually correct. He rallies the group to move on, smiling again, and the party follows because they've accepted that the man asking uncomfortable questions is also the only reason any of them are still alive. They advance through a barren stretch of stone. The party walks in formation now, less like strangers and more like people who have survived a shared workplace incident. Then they find a treasure chest vibrating with energy. Kassan identifies it as one of the maze's rewards, unlockable only by a real thief, and Ketal tells him to open it, since that is his role. All eyes turn to Kassan. The thief kneels by the chest and internally admits that a rogue of his real caliber has no business being in a dungeon like this. Translation, he cannot actually pick locks. Ketal, completely oblivious, is thrilled to watch a rogue's skills up close. He looks at Kassan the way a fan looks at a main dancer during a twice comeback, fully invested, zero skepticism. Kassan panics. He imagines Ketal's face twisting into cold contempt. Hears the imaginary line, "You call yourself a rogue, yet you cannot even do that?" He cannot bring himself to admit the truth. The pressure mounts. Ketal's actual expression is patient encouragement, but Kassan's brain has already rendered it as a death sentence. He sees his own uselessness reflected in those glowing purple eyes. Terrified of failing in front of the group and fearing he will die if he does, Kassan agrees to make the attempt anyway. His voice stays steady, his fear does not. He approaches the lock. The others watch. Ketal watches most intently of all, still wearing that warm, expectant smile. Kassan's hand trembles on the mechanism. And that is when our barbarian learned that not every fantasy class comes with the skills on the 10. Episode 1. Out. So apparently, in this economy, swordmasters are the ones who need saving, because Ketal just stopped a legendary blade with one bare fingertip, and the purple spark at the point of contact is the entire power system short-circuiting in real time. This is the barbarian who dragged the match's conclusion like a lost kitten, then looked at the continent's top swordsman and decided bandit was the correct job classification. Our boy Ketal just closed his fist, and the resulting purple energy punch sent a gold-emblemed skeleton knight flying like it was made of budget Halloween decorations. Kassan, Hayes, and Alessandro are standing there with the exact expression you'd have if your tourist friend casually one-shot the final boss you were supposed to coordinate against. Rewinding to the start of the dungeon run, Kassan opens the locked chest from the cliffhanger. He announces it openly. The party now sees the chest's contents. Hayes says only skilled thieves can unlock treasure chests. Ketal looks impressed and praises Kassan by name. Kassan reacts to receiving the compliment. Ketal asks how much the loot is worth, and an appraiser explains a regular family could live comfortably on it for about a month. Kassan hands it over, sweating, while internally questioning whether his whole doing my best to live philosophy is actually working. Then someone sets a gem-inset silver chalice on a glowing pedestal. Kassan picks it up apprehensively and immediately screams like the object personally insulted his bloodline, which, to be fair, is a very reasonable reaction to a cursed dungeon chalice. The mood shifts fast. Ketal, Kassan, and Alessandro line up amid scattered bones. Hayes joins them, and the full party of four steals itself in front of a skull and ribcage pile, as Ketal calmly volunteers to handle 3 of whatever is coming. Kassan admits the situation is becoming a real battle. A skeletal humanoid with glowing blue eyes activates and lets out a guttural cry. It is another of the dungeon's skeletons attacking now. The skeleton horde stirs to life around them, screaming, grinning. The 4 adventurers brace together. The dungeon is now fully hostile. Alessandro and Pring Hayes brace for impact. Kassan stares down the threat. The skeletons lunge as one, knock him backward, slash him with a sweeping energy arc. The fight is now real, no longer a Ketal solo. Ketal decides the horde is cutting into his sightseeing schedule, so he effortlessly scoops up a cluster of skeletons in his arms and tells the rest of the party to handle their own targets, while Alessandro blocks a glowing blue slash with his shield like a man who at least looks the part. Alessandro absorbs another heavy blow. Kassan leaps back in with 2 short blades and lands a hit. Hayes' eyes begin glowing gold. Her skill is ready. Hayes casts Shadow of Confusion. A beam of white light slices a skeleton in half. Alessandro is thrown violently into a rocky wall. The afflicted skeleton trembles with rage under the confusion effect. The afflicted skeleton shouts and screams as confusion overwhelms it. Ketal watches from the sidelines, then remarks on the party's core skills. He unleashes a crackling purple energy punch. Debris shatters around it. With the obstacles cleared, Ketal grins and says it's time to enjoy the show, then lands a decisive glowing strike, and that's when Kassan, Hayes, and Alessandro realize, in unison, that this barbarian has been testing them the entire time. The skeleton floats in the void, clutching its blue gemmed staff. A masked, red-eyed figure watches. Alessandro lunges forward with a fierce strike. Energy slashes clash around them. The dungeon boss keeps fighting. Aftermath. A glowing skull on the ground. Hayes and Kassan winted. Alessandro leaning exhausted on his sword. And the scene briefly cuts to unnamed figures in a snowy field, noting that whoever came to the snowfield must be strong. Then returns to Ketal humming thoughtfully like he just finished a casual workout. The narration identifies the next wave as skeletons from the 3rd floor. Their numbers have increased. The party, with Ketal leading the front, advances without much difficulty. A cloaked figure murmurs, and finally, Hayes watches with worried eyes, knowing the boss still waits ahead. They reach the deepest part of the dungeon. A massive figure in dark horn plate armor sits motionless on a stone throne, broadsword in hand. The party looks up at the raised dais with unease. A pale, white-haired young stranger nearby looks surprised. The dungeon has another presence. Hayes worries aloud that a sword and shield skeleton is night level and may be too much. Asking what happens if they retreat, Ketal calmly explains that a sanctioned retreat, if confirmed reasonable by the territory, would be processed without issue, which is the most bureaucratically comforting thing a barbarian has ever said. Picking back up at the skeleton knight, Ketal smirks and says this one actually maintains its own form. The armored skeleton roars back. It is not yet engaged, Ketal. The knight unleashes a massive purple blast that knocks the whole party backward, shattering Alessandro's golden barrier, and this is the moment the party collectively understands that maintains its own form was Ketal's polite way of saying, "This one hits back." Everyone is reeling. Alessandro gasps that a single blow has that much power, and the skeleton knight lunges again in one more violent purple eruption, which brings us back to Ketal closing his fist and deciding the conversation is over. Ketal's colossal purple energy punch blasts the gold emblem skeletal knight backward, and Kassan, Hayes, and Alessandro react with the kind of stunned disbelief you only see when someone casually invalidates the difficulty curve you are all struggling with. Ketal asks, "Is that all?" with the confidence of a man who has never met a problem that couldn't be punched. But then he freezes, because an even larger figure in a dark gold-trimmed robe looms into view, dwarfing even his 3-meter frame, and Kaysen stammers in shock at whatever escalation the dungeon has just pulled out of its robe. The Barbarian versus the Swordmaster. That's the headline this whole episode is building toward, but first, our boy has to finish clearing the dungeon that he already made look like a side quest. The skeleton knight has been destroyed. Ketal killed it in a single blow. The party finds a locked treasure chest that is reportedly too high level for any of them to open normally. Kassan tries to pick the lock but fails. His thief skills are not high enough for this chest. Ketal breaks the chest open himself. Vapor and treasure light burst out. Hayes and Alessandro stare in horror. Ketal calmly says the rewards are better this way, and Kassan is left holding his mask, wondering why he was even asked to unlock anything if brute force was always on the table. The party reaches a stone archway, steps through a blinding white portal, and suddenly they are outdoors in daylight. Kassan notes there is no secret room, and Ketal looks around like a man who just exited a loading screen. Back at the fortress, an official greets them and asks how the dungeon went. Ketal gives an enthusiastic thumbs up while the group is led inside one by one for debriefing. The officials say there were no major issues, but then one asks whether it is acceptable for the barbarian to stay in the domain. Hayes looks worried, and a red-haired official hedges so hard she trails off mid-sentence whenever Ketal is the subject. Kassan steps in and personally vouches for Ketal, insisting he did not harm the party and is very different from a typical barbarian, which is a generous way of saying, yes, he's terrifying, but he's polite about it. Another official praises Alessandro and Hayes for their frontline work. A skeptical soldier remarks that it is unusual for a forced party of strangers to speak well of one another. Usually, the backstabbing would have started by now. Outside, someone hands the party a pouch and tells them to divide it among themselves, but Ketal, of all people, says he does not feel like keeping the reward for himself this time, and the others react like he just announced a tax audit. Ketal insists the reward must be shared fairly and refuses to let anyone decline. Kassan, Hayes, and Alessandro laugh together. For a moment, they feel like a real team rather than 4 people forced together by circumstance. Then they all dissolve into exaggerated comedic tears because nothing says friendship like a barbarian forcing you to accept money you did not think you deserved. Word spreads quickly among the bystanders. They begin calling Ketal a barbarian who can fell a skeleton knight in a single blow. One of them elevates the title further, calling him the Barbarian of Legend, an alien existence. A knight decides this news needs to go straight to the Lord and leaves guards behind on watch, because when a mythological being clears your dungeon like a chore, the paperwork goes upstairs. A written report is drawn up and carried to a lord's chambers. A kneeling messenger announces, "My lord," and the seated nobleman, intrigued, asks, "What is it?" as word of the barbarian's feat finally reaches the people with castles. Word of the dungeon clear has spread through the upper ranks, and now the scene shifts to a lavish palace. A soldier explains to the local lord that he allowed the newcomer through because it did not appear to be a serious matter at the time. Lord Luke Barkin, the man in the red coat, presses for details. His advisor cuts to the point. The newcomer's sheer strength is the problem. He felled the skeleton knight in a single blow, and the room reacts with shock. Barkin asks how strong, and the answer physically throws a man backward out of his chair, which is a very effective PowerPoint transition. The claim that one punch retired a skeleton knight lands with the kind of silence where you can hear everyone's career plans rewriting themselves. Barkin tries to file this under Barbarian. Simple, ignorant, solves everything through strength, which is a comfortable folder. Then his own people confirm the man is genuinely first-rate, and that folder catches fire. The Lord weighs the instability of a powerful unknown roaming his territory and decides he'd rather look the problem in the eye. An advisor asks if summoning this person is wise. Barkin replies that it is not, but ignoring him would be worse. He has his knight with him, so he feels safe. The knight is already boasting about his sword training under a legendary master. Barkin formally commands his men to summon the barbarian so he can speak with him directly. And right there, sandwiched between the order and the ego, a fleeting vision flashes of Ketal clashing with a white-haired, green-cloaked swordsman. That's our title fight being teased before the characters even know they're in one. Cut to Ketal, who has used his dungeon payout to buy his party a tavern feast and is now savoring the quiet. He tells Kazan, Hayes, and Alessandro to eat as much as they like because it is his treat. Ketal asks if there's a temple nearby, and the answer he gets is a nervous theology lesson. The local deity is Kalosha, god of lies and deceit, widely shunned and cast out by the masses. Ketal absorbs this the same way he absorbs everything, with polite curiosity and zero social prejudice. Surrounded by ghostly knights and dragons that exist only in his mental slideshow, Ketal reflects on his combat rank since leaving the snowfields. Hayes, the purple-haired cleric in her nun's habit, remarks that a first-rate warrior could probably beat someone at his level, which is a generous way of saying you're second-rate, handsome. The group startles a shopkeeper into closing early and jokes about being too busy. Ketal finally gets to lie down in a real bed. He calls it paradise compared to the snowfields. He also looms over a random older man mid-drink. Ketal's dream sequence is just him planning his vacation. He wants to experience more, have an adventure, maybe visit the sacred grounds of the elves, and Milena Akasha, standing beside him with her light blue hair and star-shaped pendant, calmly adds the magic tower and the royal capital to his itinerary. Our boy has gone from survival mode to TripAdvisor mode. A loud crash jolts him awake. A soldier apologizes for waking him, then delivers Lord Barkin's summons. The Lord wishes to see him in person. Ketal has not finished his preparations. The next morning, Ketal agrees to go with the soldiers and asks for a moment to grab his clothes. The soldier escorting him is stunned. They found the right guy so easily because when you're hunting a 3-meter mythological being, you expect at least a chase sequence and maybe a boss theme. Walking through Barkin territory in daylight, Ketal remarks that he only got a rough look at the place at night, but now it is surprisingly interesting. He says he will gladly take this lucky turn any time. The soldiers around him cannot tell whether that is a threat or praise. Inside the palace, a guard blocks sightlines ahead of the audience, and Ketal is led down a long red carpet toward the throne. The Lord formally introduces himself by name and title: Luke Barkin, Lord of the Barkin Territory, Kingdom of Gehentra. An on-panel name plaque appears. Ketal shakes Barkin's hand, then playfully forces the Lord's head down into a mock bow. The onlookers panic because the barbarian is bowing his head, except Ketal is the one making Barkin bow, and the internal narration notes that barbarians never bow because to them strength is everything. This is Ketal's version of a handshake, technically polite, structurally dominant. Barkin is visibly unsettled, with what looks like a horned purple silhouette looming behind him. He remarks that living long enough lets you see it all. Then he politely invites Ketal to sit. Ketal looks around the castle like a tourist who has never seen medieval architecture before, which is accurate. He notices an armored knight guarding the Lord and reacts with genuine fanboy awe at seeing a real knight up close, the same knight who is about to have the worst workday of his life. Then Ketal suddenly radiates intense purple killing intent, and the room temperature drops about 30 degrees. Someone cries that revealing such bloodlust before the Lord is unforgivable, and a knight draws his sword warning that Ketal will not leave alive, which is a brave thing to say to a man whose aura just made the furniture nervous. With tension still crackling, Barkin's mustached advisor says there are a few things he wants to verify. Ketal calmly agrees to answer, and the first question is where he came from. Cue flashback panel of a white-haired figure in an icy crystalline landscape. Ketal names his origin the White Snowfield. The room processes White Snowfield the way a computer processes a divide by zero error. A thought bubble confirms the real identity. He is the barbarian of legend. Ketal, meanwhile, reacts skeptically to being told something hard to believe, because from his perspective, he just walked out of a very cold neighborhood. Barkin, seated on his throne, asks Ketal directly how strong he is. A bystander trembles just from being near the answer. The lord and his knights confer around the table. Barkin proposes a spar between Ketal and his knight, promising a good reward. Ketal reacts with the excited surprise of a man who has just been offered front-row tickets to his own hobby. Barkin cautions him to keep things within reason, a reasonable request that Ketal will interpret with barbarian units of measurement. Someone mutters that a barbarian is a barbarian after all. Ketal privately notes that no matter how politely these nobles act, they cannot hide their love of battle. The scene reveals a massive ancient colosseum. Ketal descends into the arena alone while Barkin watches from a balcony throne. The knight stands ready. A hand reaches for the starting bell. The knight tells Ketal to consider it an honor to witness his swordsmanship. Ketal replies that he would prefer that too. The knight vows through gritted teeth that he will show him. The bell rings. The spar begins. The knight unleashes a green aura sword technique with all the ceremony of a man who has trained his entire life. Ketal answers with one overwhelming blow that sends him flying. The knight lands in visible shock at the sheer difference in strength, and Ketal, still standing exactly where he started, calmly asks what he'll do now, which is the most condescending post-hit check-in in fantasy combat history. And that, right there, is why the episode is called The Barbarian versus the Swordmaster. Because when a top-tier knight goes down in one casual swing, the only person left on the board who might still be interesting is the man with the green cloak and the recently shattered pride. In the throne room, Ketal stands before the court without pretense, refusing to adopt the manners expected of him. Purple killing intent rolls off him in waves. A guard's eye goes wide, and the room realizes the nice giant they invited to tea has an off switch that nobody taught him to use. A knight draws his sword and promises Ketal won't leave alive, which is a bold threat to make to a man whose aura just made the wallpaper nervous. The dungeon report reached the upper authorities, and Lord Luke Barkin chose to confront the entity directly, rather than allow it to move unchecked through his territory. Ketal agrees to come along, asks for a moment to grab his clothes, and the soldier escorting him is stunned they found him this easily, because when you're hunting a 3-meter legend, you expect at least a chase scene. Walking through the Barkin territory in daylight, Ketal says he'll gladly take this lucky fantasy any time, and the soldiers around him have no idea if that's a threat or a travel review. Ketal is escorted along a long red carpet to the throne. The Lord introduces himself as Luke Barkin, Lord of the Barkin territory, with a name plaque displayed beside him. Ketal shakes Barkin's hand, then playfully forces the Lord's head down into a mock bow, and the onlookers panic because they think the barbarian is bowing his head, except it's Barkin's head doing the bowing. The internal narration spells it out. Barbarians never bow their heads, because to them strength is everything, which means Ketal's version of a handshake is technically polite and structurally dominant. Barkin appears visibly unsettled by a horned purple silhouette looming behind Ketal. He remarks that a long life exposes one to many things while studying Ketal carefully. Barkin invites Ketal to sit. Ketal examines the castle interior with open unfamiliarity. He has never seen such architecture before. Then Ketal notices an armored knight guarding the Lord and reacts with genuine fanboy awe, because to him, this is a real fantasy world knight standing right there, and to the knight, this is the worst audience he has ever had. And then, without warning, Ketal radiates intense purple killing intent. The room temperature drops. A bystander identifies it as unmistakable bloodlust, and the polite meeting officially expires. The knight draws his sword and promises Ketal won't leave alive. A brave line, but the man delivering it just felt Ketal's aura rearrange the furniture. With tension still crackling, Barkin's mustached advisor says there are a few things he wants to verify, and Ketal calmly agrees to answer, sitting there like a man who has no idea why everyone just stopped breathing. The first question is where he came from. Cue flashback panel of a white-haired figure in an icy crystalline landscape, and Ketal names his origin, the White Snowfield. The room processes white snowfield the way a computer processes a divide by zero error, and a thought bubble confirms the obvious. He is really the barbarian of legend. Ketal reacts skeptically to claims he finds hard to accept. From his perspective, he merely left a cold region and now the nobles are treating him as a figure from legend. Barkin cuts to the chase and asks how strong Ketal is, and a bystander trembles just from being near the answer, because the question itself is doing emotional damage. The lore proposes a spar between Ketal and his knight, promising a good reward, and Ketal reacts with the excited surprise of a man who just got front-row tickets to his own hobby. Barkin asks Ketal to keep the proceedings reasonable. Ketal will not interpret the request with restraint. Ketal is hyped to finally see a fantasy world knight who wields mystical power and aura up close, which is adorable because that knight is about to discover what up close means to a barbarian. A bystander mutters that a barbarian remains a barbarian. Ketal privately notes that the nobles, however polite, conceal a fierce appetite for combat. The scene then reveals a massive ancient colosseum. Ketal descends alone into the dusty arena. Barkin watches from a balcony throne. A hand reaches for the starting bell. The match is framed as a spar, but the staging presents it as a formal demonstration. The knight arrogantly tells Ketal to consider it an honor to witness his swordsmanship, a line that has never aged well in any genre. Ketal calmly replies that he'd prefer that too, and the knight's ego visibly fractures. He vows through gritted teeth that he'll show him, and the bell rings on what is about to be a very short career highlight. The knight swings. Green aura erupts along the blade. The name sword technique flashes toward Ketal. Green energy detonates everywhere as the knight's blade splits into 3 real strikes mid-swing, and Ketal, caught in the middle of it, privately wonders if this fancy footwork even counts as swordsmanship. Ketal realizes the after images aren't illusions. All 3 swords are real, and the smug swordsman in the green cloak taunts him for barely dodging. Ketal says he's seen enough, clenches his fist, and thrusts forward, one overwhelming blow that clashes against the knight's sword and ends the conversation. He pins the armored knight to the ground, the sword goes flying, and a glowing red mark appears over the fallen warrior as he collapses in defeat. Ketal tears to cloth and lunges forward in a burst of white energy, sending the knight sliding across the sandy ground in a deep crater. Onlookers react with shock, and the beaten knight sits exhausted among the wreckage. The blonde knight in white plate armor, scarred chest exposed, sits bowed over a broken pillar, the visual definition of "we are not the same." Back in the palace throne room, a noble in a red coat reacts with disbelief. A top-tier knight was taken down in a single blow, and he wants to know what kind of monstrous power just did that. Standing amid the wreckage, Ketal is described as a barbarian who beat a top-tier knight in one strike, his strength called at least superhuman, and the noble in red muses that this is just the minimum of his true power. The narration identifies the visitor this news will pique, one of the few people in the world who holds the title of Swordmaster, and we already saw him in the arena. Swordmaster Kane enters the room with arms crossed and demands an explanation for the matter he is supposed to find significant. Nearby officials react with visible nervousness. It's revealed that Ketal's body is completely unscathed, aside from torn clothes, which sparks speculation about whether he was showing mercy, because the alternative is that a top-tier knight couldn't even damage him. Kane confidently declares that even if Ketal can wield superhuman strength, he is no match for a swordmaster, a line that, based on recent evidence, is about to be stress-tested. Kane muses that Ketal didn't even use aura in the fight and questions the true nature of his power, while officials confirm the rumors. The barbarian really hails from the White Wasteland, the place said to hold a legendary being. Kane concludes, visibly unsettled, that Ketal is something else entirely. A vision of a monstrous white-furred, purple-eyed beast appears across the scene, as if reflecting his suspicion. Kane then catches himself and dismisses the thought. He asks if the barbarian is in this domain now, and the panel visually pairs the ash-skinned, purple-eyed, scarred Ketal against Kane's green-cloaked presence, the title card we've been waiting for. Kane decides he must see the outcome himself. The episode is titled The Barbarian versus the Swordmaster. The spar is already over, but the room is still processing it. A noble in red stares at the wreckage and asks what kind of monstrous power takes down a top-tier knight in a single strike, and before anyone answers, a fur-cloaked figure steps forward smirking like he just heard his name called. Ketal stands in the crater he made, completely calm, while officials whisper that a barbarian who can beat a knight in one blow is at least superhuman. The man in red corrects them, that's just the minimum. The true depth of his power is still unmeasured. The noble muses that this news should pique the interest of someone very specific, one of the few people alive who holds the title of Swordmaster. The next panel cuts to that figure making a dramatic entrance. Swordmaster Kane arrives without asking permission, arms crossed, green cloak, white hair, the full legendary package. He looks at the gathered officials and says, flatly, that they are going to tell him about this matter that's supposed to interest him. It's not a request. A host bows and thanks Kane for visiting on such short notice, because apparently even lords have to be polite to the man who can split a mountain. Kane stands there calm, patient, and completely aware that everyone in the room is now rethinking their career choices. The defeated knight is recovering in bed, apologizing to his lord for needing a few days. The noble in red turns from the bedside and begins briefing Kane, shifting the focus of the conversation away from the knight's condition. Kane learns the real detail that matters. Besides some torn clothes, Ketal's body is completely unscathed. The witness asks the obvious question, was Barbarian showing mercy? And Kane's face shifts from confident to quietly alarmed. The report continues, Ketal so far exceeds a knight's level that he can afford to show mercy. The room goes silent. Then Kane straightens up and declares that even if the barbarian wields superhuman strength, he is no match for a swordmaster. Famous last words, but make them regal. Kane notices the part everyone else missed. Ketal didn't even use aura. He asks aloud what kind of power this is, while officials confirm the rumors that the barbarian really came from the White Wasteland, the legendary place humans aren't supposed to survive. The narration identifies the White Wasteland as a place said to hold a legendary being. Ketal stands alone, staring into the distance, questioning whether he is even human. He answers his own question with uncertainty, and the doubt carries weight. Back in the palace, Kane reaches the logical conclusion and immediately hates it. Ketal is something else entirely. For one panel, a monstrous white-furred beast with purple eyes flashes across the scene, the visual version of Kane's worst-case scenario. Kane catches himself and says no. That can't be it, because if Ketal were truly something monstrous, he wouldn't have bothered showing mercy to a human. A demonic-looking woman elsewhere agrees, dismissing her own suspicion with the same logic. The genre is doing peer review on its own, red herring. Ketal, alone in the snow of his own memory or his own question, asks why someone from the White Wasteland would resurface now. Kane, back in the warm room, asks the same question in different words. Is the barbarian in this domain right now? The panel gives us the pairing we've been waiting for, Ketal's ashen skin, purple eyes, and diagonal chest scars set against Kane's white hair, green cloak, and green aura. The episode title isn't a metaphor anymore, it's a scheduled appointment. Kane resolves to see for himself, because at this point the official report has more gaps than a speedrun tutorial. And that, right there, is why this episode is called The Barbarian vs. the Swordmaster. Our boy has officially reached the part of the isekai where you stop saving kingdoms and start doing side quests for emotional validation. Lord Barkin, having injured his hand punching Ketal, tells Ketal he will no longer interfere with anything he does inside the territory. Ketal's internal response is basically, great, now I just need some official paperwork, so people stop looking at me like I'm a raid boss on vacation. The soldiers explain that unless a mercenary reaches a certain rank, they are only assigned menial tasks. One soldier remarks that this is the ultimate fantasy. Ketal hears there's a guild hall nearby and lights up like someone just told him the convention center opened early, while the soldier pointing the way has a visible existential crisis about the size of the smile hovering above him. The narration gently reminds us that mercenary life is not all heroics. Unidentified dungeons eat skilled fighters, and the guild hall itself is currently hosting a brawl where someone is being thrown like a piece of furniture. At the front desk, Rosa is having a terrible day. New recruits include a fake holy knight, a thief, and a nun nobody trusts because of her god, all while mercenaries keep picking fights in the background. She sighs that mercenaries keep picking fights all day, then daydreams about a cool, handsome prince on a white horse rescuing her from this desk job, which is the exact moment a 3-meter ashen giant steps through the doorway. Rosa looks up, and her expression says the prince has been outclassed by logistics. Ketal enters the guild hall, looks around, and announces to everyone present that he has come to become a mercenary. Every mercenary in the building freezes mid-motion because when the mythological survivalist asks for an application form, the room collectively forgets how employment works. Rosa stammers out a confirmation you want to become a mercenary and explains that official status needs proper registration, name, age, the whole paperwork ritual. She processes his registration with the nervous energy of someone filing tax paperwork for a natural disaster, and Ketal just stands there politely, which somehow makes it worse. Registration complete. Ketal holds his little coin and immediately asks to take on a job right away, and Rosa has to reboot her brain because most new mercenaries do not sprint toward minimum wage. Rosa fears barbarians are proud and may lash out, but she hesitantly offers Ketal a simple herb-gathering request. Ketal accepts without complaint. She shows him the illustration of the red flower, he takes the request card, says he'll head out immediately, and the guild staff quietly processes that the giant is doing fetch quests with the enthusiasm of a main story raid. Out in the field, Ketal compares the drawing to the actual flowers, notes they look strange, and begins gathering them in large quantities. He returns and empties an enormous sack of red flowers onto the guild counter. Rosa gasps, and a bystander asks if he destroyed the entire herb field. Ketal looks down at the mountain of flowers and asks, plainly, if this is enough, which is the humblest possible way to flex that he could probably clear the entire region's economy before lunch. The guild appraises the flowers as being in excellent condition and pays him his reward, 1 silver coin, barely enough for the cheapest meal in town. Ketal looks at the single coin with quiet, genuine satisfaction, and Rosa watches him, unable to understand why someone so strong is happy with so little. His sincere gratitude moves her to tears. She does not understand how someone so powerful can be so moved by a single silver coin. Next day, Ketal is already on his 3rd cleaning task, and a bystander nervously wonders if the barbarian actually likes cleaning, which is not a question the genre prepared us for. He reports in to clean a warehouse, and the person receiving him has a full-body alarm response upon realizing a barbarian has been assigned to janitorial duty. Then it's street sweeping, and Ketal is carefully controlling his immense strength so he doesn't accidentally turn the broom into a ranged weapon, while 2 townsmen watch in disbelief. From a nearby rooftop, Swordmaster Kane watches through binoculars, asking what the hell Ketal is doing because the man who can shake a kingdom is currently fighting litter. The narration spells it out. Ketal is powerful enough to demand honor anywhere, yet he's choosing to do menial chores, and Kane cannot fit that behavior into any worldview he trained his entire life to understand. Ketal isn't half-hearted about it either. He finishes sweeping with genuine satisfaction, surrounded by sparkles and pink flowers, while Kane stares like his brain has encountered an unsupported file format. After a brief dramatic cutaway to a rain-soaked battlefield version of Ketal that looks like it belongs in a different anime, he gets handed a small pouch of silver coins for his first day as a mercenary. A young man's eyes widen in close-up, showing strong emotional reaction to the transaction. Rosa counts out 15 silver coins. Ketal thanks her warmly and says he'll be back tomorrow, already treating this like a stable routine, which is the most fantasy world thing about him. Ketal walks through the town square. An elderly woman, a young woman, and a middle-aged man all stare at him with alarmed expressions. He arrives at a large building. The door opens with a bell, and the bespectacled librarian inside startles, surprised to see the local barbarian enter a library. Ketal politely asks if he may read some books, settles in at a table, and the librarian watches from her desk with the wary energy of someone waiting for him to eat the encyclopedia. Kane watches from outside, surprised that a barbarian reads at all, and starts wondering if this one is simply exceptional, which is a polite way of admitting his stereotypes are not holding up. Ketal reads the history book and learns that Melina Akasha came to the snowfield years ago to sell weapons to a kingdom at war with the Empire, and that the Empire won that war anyway. The book shows red banners and armored ranks, and the narration notes the Empire has already devoured half the human world, which gives Ketal's tourism goals a slightly darker geopolitical backdrop. He opens another book on non-human races and finds entries on the dwarven cave of Montamia, the fairy village of Pisarapia, and the sky city of the Celestials, Legemeria. Ketal realizes he now has the qualification to visit the Elven Sanctuary and reacts with astonishment that there are places as vast as the white snowfields scattered across the world. The book keeps going. A dragon with glowing purple eyes, a misty forest, a demonic woman with horns in a hellscape, and finally a panel of Ketal in a snowy wasteland beside a bald man and a woman, all three with glowing purple eyes. He closes the book, marveling at how big the world must be, thanks the librarian, and steps out into a sunlit garden, a man who has survived the wasteland, now overwhelmed by the size of the brochure. Back at the guild, Ketal is handed today's batch of request forms, and Kane, still watching from the shadows, mutters that Ketal really is strange and decides he will have to confront him directly. And that, my friends, is how you schedule a meeting between a swordmaster and a man who thinks street sweeping is endgame content. So here's the panel that broke Ketal's brain open: the dwarven cave of Mantamia, the fairy village of Pisarapia, the sky city of the Celestials Legemeria, and a floating castle that looks like someone modded Minecraft with divine permission. The world is not just bigger than the snowfield, it's showing off. And right there between the postcard locations, the book slips in a shadowy blue-eyed giant inside a ruined interior. The kind of illustration that says tourist destination, and you will not survive the guided tour at the same time. We'll circle back to how we got here, but the short version is, Ketal spent part of his morning sweeping streets, deliberately keeping the broom an ordinary broom, while two townsmen watched a 3-meter figure perform civic labor. From a rooftop, Swordmaster Kane is looking through binoculars, asking what the hell this man is doing, because the guy who could shake a kingdom is currently fighting litter with the intensity of a raid boss learning domestic skills. Ketal is not half-hearted about this. He finishes sweeping, sparkles and pink flowers appear around him, and he beams with genuine satisfaction while Kane stares like his entire worldview just got a Windows blue screen. After a brief cutaway to rain-soaked battlefield Ketal, he receives a small pouch of silver coins for his first day as a mercenary, while a young woman reacts to the transaction with visible emotional weight. Ketal walks through the town square drawing stares from an elderly woman, a young woman, and a middle-aged man, all registering the same unguarded surprise. He arrives at a large timber-framed building. The door opens with a bell, and the bespectacled librarian inside nearly jumps out of her chair, because the last person she expected in a library is the local barbarian who could probably shelve the entire top row without a ladder. Ketal politely asks if he may read some books, and the librarian responds with a small scream, then settles in to watch from her desk with the wary energy of someone waiting for him to eat the encyclopedia. Swordmaster Kane watches from outside, genuinely surprised that a barbarian reads and wonders if this one is simply exceptional, forcing him to reconsider his assumptions. The librarian taps a book titled History for him, and Ketal opens it to find Melina Akasha, his first client, blue hair and all, described as coming to the snowfield years ago to sell weapons to a kingdom at war with the Empire. The book shows red banners, ranked armored knights, and the grim narration that the Empire has already devoured half the human world. So Ketal's tourism goals now have a slightly darker geopolitical backdrop than the brochure suggested. A tense battlefield standoff illustration follows, a colossal armored warrior flanked by shadows, and Ketal rests his chin on his hand, processing that the fantasy world he prayed for comes with active war crimes included in the downloadable content. Ketal's gaze sharpens. He decides to look into non-human races, opens a book titled Non-Human, and begins reading about the fantastical creatures compiled inside, treating it as practical reconnaissance. And now we're back at the hero panel, the dwarven cave, the fairy village, the sky city, and that floating castle, an itinerary that dwarfs the white snowfield in scale and implication. Sandwiched between the wonder locations is that ruined interior with the blue-eyed giant, the book's warning that some destinations demand strength Ketal may not yet have. Ketal realizes he now has the qualification to visit the Elven Sanctuary, and is stunned to learn there are multiple places as vast as the white snowfield. The man who survived that wasteland is now overwhelmed by the scale of what lies beyond it. The book keeps going. A black-scaled dragon with glowing purple eyes, a misty forest that implies a major threat, and the demonic woman with horns and a hellscape of chains and fire, each entry another hazardous destination. Then the page closes on Ketal standing in a snowy wasteland beside a bald man and a woman, all three with glowing purple eyes, a family photo from a reunion he doesn't remember attending, and the most loaded illustration in the entire library. Ketal marvels at how big the world must be. The white snowfield alone was enormous, and apparently there are multiple places like it, which is the exact moment the series upgrades from local legend does chores to this man needs a world map and maybe a travel agent. He closes the book, thanks the visibly relieved librarian, and steps out through the library door into a sunlit garden, a man who survived the wasteland now emotionally overwhelmed by the breadth of the world he has just read about. Back at the guild, Ketal is greeted and handed today's batch of request forms, because no matter how many wonders he just read about, his current quest log is still sweep things, gather things, try not to accidentally found a religion. Sword Master Kane, still watching from the shadows, mutters that Ketal really is strange and decides he will have to confront him directly, which means the title card we've been carrying finally gets its appointment confirmed: the Barbarian versus the Sword Master. Ketal walks home after completing a large number of small mercenary requests. He puts his coin pouch away. The town observes him without understanding his steady satisfaction with minor work. Cut to a stone alley where Swordmaster Kane is lurking in a green hooded cloak, presence fully suppressed, the fantasy world equivalent of turning off your online status. He thinks he's invisible. Ketal's shoulders tense, like someone just read a spoiler in the chat. Kane's internal monologue is pure shock. He definitely suppressed his presence completely, so how did this man notice him? Ketal turns around, grabs Kane by the hand, and asks what he wants, already filing him under probable bandit. The Swordmaster is now being treated like a tutorial pickpocket. Kane hesitates to claim he is a Swordmaster after Ketal catches him stalking. Ketal smiles and says he will turn Kane into the guild for credit. Kane decides words will not resolve the situation. He engages Ketal directly with his aura to pressure test him. He clenches a fist, green energy flares, and the fight escalates. Kane launches an aura-powered strike, and Ketal just vanishes. Not dodges, vanishes. Kane's eyes go wide because the target he was locked onto is now somewhere else entirely, moving at a speed that should require aura but doesn't. Kane's next strike is fast enough to catch Ketal off guard, knocking him backward as green energy arcs through the alley. Ketal barely evades a neck grab and realizes this bandit was aiming for a lethal opening. His expression shifts from curious to actually interested. Ketal compliments Kane's speed with a calm "not bad," which is the most disrespectful thing you can say after nearly being decapitated. Kane, meanwhile, is reevaluating his entire career, because he just realized he cannot sense a single trace of aura from this man, yet Ketal almost caught him anyway. Kane abandons restraint. He channels everything, green aura roaring around him, and announces he is going all in. His diagnostics returned nothing, so he commits his full strength. Ketal closes the distance in a blur and grabs Kane, and the Swordmaster feels it immediately. This is not a grapple. This is a structural failure. Ketal's grip strength is overwhelming in a way that has nothing to do with technique and everything to do with being built out of the wrong material. Kane cries out, push past his limit, and unleashes his full aura power in a massive green detonation. The alley lights up like a raid boss just popped its enrage timer, except the boss is the one standing still, and Kane is the one burning cooldowns he didn't know he had. The full power release erupts across the alley, a colossal green shockwave that should end most fights. Kane lunges through it with everything he has, the kind of strike that made him a Swordmaster in the first place. The alley does not survive. Ketal might. Kane is left panting, hands on his knees, aura flickering like a phone at 2%. Ketal stands there unmarked and still assumes he's fighting a particularly talented bandit, remarking that bandits these days sure have all kinds of techniques. Kane's pride is now in critical condition. Kane looks up and asks what kind of body can endure manifested mana, bare-handed without injury. Ketal smiles, radiant and unbothered, having only recently realized the answer is his own body. Cain draws his sword to finish the fight. Ketal halts the blade with one bare fingertip. Purple energy crackles at the contact point. The swordmaster stares at his sword, stopped by a man who still thinks this is a bandit encounter. Ketal lunges. Cain's face finally shows what his pride has hidden. This is not a fight. He is the prey. He reacts in shock and terror as the barbarian closes with no aura, no technique, only forward momentum. Cain resigns himself to the end, closing his eyes as Ketal reaches down toward him. So this is the end, he thinks, which is a very dramatic final thought for a man who is about to be carried through town like a lost cat. Ketal comically hoists the now chibi-fied, defeated Swordmaster Cain by the scruff of his cloak and declares that this must be what passes for a bandit around here. The Barbarian versus the Swordmaster, round 1, ends not with a corpse, but with a man being dragged to the guild for quest credit. Ketal walks out of that alley dragging Swordmaster Cain by the scruff of his green cloak, like a man who just caught the world's most overleveled stray cat, already calculating the guild reputation this bandit arrest is going to earn him. The nearby soldiers recognize the dangling old man immediately, and their faces say what their mouths cannot, that is Swordmaster Cain, holder of one of the highest superhuman titles on the continent, currently being hauled away like a tavern pickpocket. Word spreads quickly among the guards and knights. They stand in disbelief, unable to reconcile the prestige of Sir Cain's name with the humiliating sight of his defeated body. Some guards desperately theorize that this must be illusion magic, a trick, a body double, anything except the obvious truth that their swordmaster genuinely lost a duel to a barbarian who still thinks he caught a common bandit. The news slams down in the throne room summer-off panel, and an unseen nobleman reacts with the kind of outrage that only happens when your entire political risk assessment just caught fire and walked through town wearing it. In a lavish room, officials confirm the impossible. Sir Cain, a true swordmaster, lost to the barbarian. Their verdict on Ketal is not that he is strong, but that he is completely unmanageable. No existing classification fits him. Cut to a much quieter scene. Ketal and Cain sitting across from each other over tea. The green cloak now draped like a man trying to pretend he has dignity left while his hands shake hard enough to register on local seismographs. Cain formally introduces himself as Swordmaster Cain, explaining that once someone reaches Swordmaster rank, human surnames become meaningless, a line that sounds profound until Ketal, genuinely confused, asks if Swordmaster is therefore his actual surname. Cain demonstrates a swirl of green energy in his palm and names it Aura. Ketal's face lights up. The force he stopped with a fingertip in the alley is part of a formal discipline. Ketal leans forward and asks how he can learn to use Aura himself. Cain explains that Aura and Mana are two different applications of the same root energy, the arcane, the power within oneself. Ketal listens intently, as if he has finally been given the manual for the body he has used by instinct alone. Cain protests that Ketal is already stronger than him, so what is there to teach? Ketal insists anyway, because strength without vocabulary is just a very large person who cannot explain why the floor keeps breaking. Stung by the loss, but clinging to the idea that his pride can be reclaimed through pedagogy, Cain agrees to train Ketal in swordsmanship, though privately he is already wondering whether skill with a blade can ever bridge the gap he just measured with his own neck. The training begins on a cracked stone ground, and Cain opens with his signature thesis: his swordsmanship embodies illusion and reality. Skill over strength, the art of making one strike look like many and every one of them hurt. Then Cain demonstrates true aura swordsmanship, for real, a green aura blade drawn and driven into the earth, shattering the ground beneath it in a single devastating strike that finally shows Ketal what this whole fantasy swordsmanship thing is supposed to look like. Cain follows up by splitting a single strike into 5 real blades of force. He insists this illusion-made substance technique is the product of a lifetime and could never be copied from one viewing. Ketal picks up his axe, swings it with no aura and no technique at all, and produces the same splitting strike purely through speed and brute strength. The world's worst magic trick, because the audience is the one whose worldview disappears. Kane stares at the devastation and admits he was almost fooled. There was no technique behind it, but the result was nearly the same, which is the kind of sentence a swordmaster should never have to say out loud. Kane's pride finally ignites. He snarls that this hurts, grips his sword, and unleashes a full-force strike that carves a crater into the training ground. A genuine, furious display of everything a swordmaster can pour into one blow. Ketal answers with a purple energy blast from his axe that is not just bigger but almost insultingly casual, a counterstrike that turns Kane's crater into a suggestion and leaves the old man gasping at the distance between their ceilings. And here is the image that breaks the episode. Swordmaster Kane collapses to his hands and knees on the shattered ground, physically and mentally undone by a gulf in power that no amount of technique can cross. Kane weeps, devastated that a lifetime of swordsmanship was matched by a man who merely swung an axe quickly, while Ketal stands there with his arms crossed diagnosing the problem as mental fragility, which is technically not wrong, but also not therapeutic. Kane rallies the only way a master can by deciding his technique still has value even if raw strength can photocopy its results, privately branding Ketal a lunatic for blurring without aura and clearing his throat to continue the lesson. He lays out the theory of aura. Everyone except divine believers must first awaken the arcane, the mysterious power within oneself, and he describes it as a path with 5 stages that begins with simply sensing what is already there. The first stage is third class, the stage of merely sensing the arcane. The broader ranks are third class, second class, first class, superhuman, and hero. Kane adds that these are only convenient classifications with blurry boundaries. Ketal and Kane stand facing each other on the cracked training ground, and Kane says the words that close this act and open the next question. Then let's begin. This is what happens when you pick a fight with a man whose inner world has no room for your feelings. Kardos, the skeletal sorcerer who toppled 5 kingdoms, is screaming inside Ketal's mind, vowing to shatter his blades and rule the world once more, and Ketal looks like someone who just found a bug in a video game. The Lich thought he was invading a barbarian. Instead, he woke up inside an abyss with no bottom, no arcane path, and apparently no customer service department. And the barbarian is still just standing there, bored. The story will return to how a 3-meter warrior from the White Snowfield became the barbarian who killed a Lich. Swordmaster Kane begins teaching Ketal to sense the arcane. He instructs him to feel the wind, touch the earth, and notice the separate presence within everything. Ketal sits cross-legged and concentrates, trying to perceive the magic path that other adventurers eventually find. He has purple eyes from the system, but he cannot sense arcane energy. Kane opens his eyes and looks like someone just checked his bank account after a convention. He genuinely thought someone with Ketal's raw output would sense the arcane instantly, which is a reasonable assumption if you've never met a barbarian whose body is built like a dungeon wall. Kane floats the idea that the White Snowfield itself might be the problem, but Ketal quietly points out that nobody around him has ever sensed anything like the arcane either. So either the snowfield is contagious, or the issue is a little more portable. Kane channels his own aura directly into Ketal. Ketal is eager to try the method. Kane tells him to relax completely and focus inward. The moment Kane's aura makes contact, his face does the thing veteran readers recognize, the "this shouldn't be possible" expression. Internally, he's staring at Ketal's body, wondering if he's even human, because aura is supposed to flow through living things, not bounce off them like a pebble on a shield. Kane loses focus during the ritual and apologizes for drifting away. He notes that most of his students lack Ketal's durability. Ketal's body withstood the strain better than a typical disciple could. Kane resets and explains the real goal: awaken Ketal's own arcane path. Ketal, still channeling, describes what the search feels like in his own words. His description shows the attempt is failing. We cut to Ketal's inner world. It is a vast blue abyss, not a place of peace. He stretches his senses outward as far as they can reach and finds nothing there. Back in the room, Kane closes his eyes and delivers the verdict. It won't work. Ketal's shoulders slump, genuinely, thoroughly bummed out, as he asks if this means he just has zero talent for magic. The man just got a personal energy transfer from a swordmaster And it still wasn't enough, and for once he doesn't have a deadpan comeback ready. Here it is, the hero panel. Kane admits he couldn't even confirm whether Ketal's arcane path exists. Not hidden, not sealed. His body is so physically dense that aura can't reach deep enough inside to find out. Ketal reacts with the kind of blank shock you save for bad patch notes. Kane says he's never seen a body like this and can't confirm either way. Maybe a more aura-specialized swordmaster could help, maybe not. Ketal worries aloud that he'll never gain the arcane, and Kane apologizes like this is somehow his fault. Ketal brushes it off, because of course he does. Ketal tells Kane the attempt still mattered and thanks him. Kane observes that every barbarian he has known was uncontrollable, but Ketal restrained himself and accepted the outcome without lashing out. Kane offers to sponsor Ketal if he'll join the kingdom. Ketal refuses flatly, he doesn't want to be tied down. The man crossed a frozen wasteland for years just to see the world. He's not about to clock in for a pension plan now. The scene cuts to an unnamed crowned figure, the Emperor, if we're reading the room correctly, imagining Ketal's colossal, glowing-eyed silhouette looming over a battlefield. Someone in the Empire already understands the value of having a walking natural disaster on payroll. Kane asks if the offer is insufficient. Ketal refuses with arms crossed, and Kane accepts with grace. They shake hands. Ketal says he will not forget the kindness, and the training arc ends with mutual respect. Kane walks off alone down a stone corridor, and the dread sets in. Not knowing what Ketal is thinking makes him more unpredictable than other barbarians, possibly even something connected to the demon realm. The swordmaster who just failed to read our guy is now quietly considering whether he should have tried harder. In a council scene, Kane sighs that the Emperor has gone half mad with this demon realm conquest idea. Another official is stunned. Humanity hasn't even been fully conquered yet, and the Emperor is already planning the next expansion. The patch notes for this war are getting ahead of themselves. The chapter closes on whispers that dungeon outbreaks are not natural and the demon realm's taint is leaking into the world. Something bad is coming for humans. On top of everything else, Ketal's arrival may coincide with a catastrophe. A skeletal hand rolls a glowing blue orb between its bony fingers. We'll circle back to how Ketal ended up holding the same cursed marble. But first, the kingdom's top sword guy just had the worst parent-teacher conference of his career. Swordmaster Kane is back in court, slumped in a red velvet chair. He looks like he already knows the meeting is unnecessary. A council official asks whether the Emperor really intends to conquer the demon realm, and Kane deadpans that the Emperor probably thinks he's some reborn emperor from the past. Kane adds the part that keeps generals awake. Humanity hasn't even finished conquering itself, so this expansion is less strategic planning and more a toddler grabbing a second plate at a buffet. He leans back and mutters that the Emperor has gone half mad. Another official states that this is the most relatable thing a Transcendent has said all season. Another official presses him for confirmation of the demon rumors. Kane begins to answer with a grim, "Yeah, the demons," but the panel cuts away before he can finish. Whispers fill the gap. Dungeon outbreaks aren't natural, and the taint of the demon realm might be leaking into the world through whatever cracks the war keeps opening. Flashes show a serpentine monster, a roaring beast, an axe-wielding demon woman, and a white serpent. The montage signals that the early threat level has ended and that more powerful enemies are now appearing. Cut to Ketal strolling through a peaceful town square, 3 meters of ashen gray tourist who makes mothers pull their children closer without meaning to. He's internally fretting that his beast-hide vest makes him look uncivilized, which is adorable because the townspeople are less worried about his fashion and more worried about his structural footprint. He ducks into a tailor shop. The bell rings and the mustached tailor freezes mid-greeting. He realizes his customer is unusually large. Ketal politely asks to buy clothes, and the staff respond with the universal retail panic of, "We don't have your size delivered in a chibi art style that cannot hide their terror." They offer him a custom order instead. Ketal accepts and places the order immediately. He has never had to worry about return policies. The tailor and his assistant immediately start sweating over whether they'll survive the fitting process, which is the most honest reaction to Ketal's shoulders anyone has had yet. On the road to the guild hall, Ketal spots something on the ground and picks up a small glowing blue orb that crackles with energy he absolutely should not ignore. The orb is pretty, it's humming, and it has the exact energy signature of a fishing link that promises free legendary gear. He decides to ask the guild hall about it, and Rosa the receptionist examines the thing with clear confusion. Her reaction suggests an expensive appraisal may follow. Rosa examines the orb and concludes it isn't even a gemstone. The surface is too smooth, clearly carved by someone, and then her eyes stay locked on it anyway, which is guild code for, "This is cursed and I don't know which curse yet." The orb suddenly flares with purple energy, startling Rosa. She reacts as if the event should be formally reported. Ketal asks if she's alright, and the genuine concern in his voice catches her off guard. This is the same man who just bench-pressed a tailoring crisis. Rosa offers to have it properly appraised, and Ketal turns her down. He'd rather investigate this one himself than pivot straight to asking what mercenary jobs are available today, because multitasking is apparently a barbarian passive skill. He takes a job, works hard enough to actually breathe heavily, and ends the day calling it another fulfilling day. He is building his life one silver coin at a time. Now the cutaway pays off. That same glowing orb is sitting in a skeletal lich's hand, while Ketal, alone in his room, hears it whisper, "Come to me," like the world's creepiest jups. Dark wisps rise from the orb, and Ketal, a man whose threat assessment is apparently set to curious, decides to follow the whisper. The orb floats in front of him and points the way, and Ketal wonders out loud if it is trying to lead him somewhere. The moment suggests a dangerous destination may be next. It keeps pulling, he keeps following, and he grumbles at it to shut up already. The first time in the series a barbarian has argued with his own loot. Out in the wild, the orb's pull finally drags him into a dark cavern where he senses something ahead and demands it show itself. Ghostly blue chains snap shut around him, and a skeletal figure steps from the darkness. Kartos Brenulis Kesses, looking like a final boss who shops at the same orb store as his victims. Kartos mocks him as some dumb barbarian fit to be his next offering, then drops the number that turns this from a random encounter into a serial case. This makes 10 now. The camera finds a single glowing chain stretched across the dark, and that is all the invitation this act needs, because we are about to watch a 3-meter tourist follow a cursed GBEPS straight into the boss room. We pick up right after Ketal argued with his own loot in the wilderness. The blue orb has led him to a void-like space where blue mist and purple clouds swirl around a hooded skeletal silhouette. Ketal stares at the orb floating in front of him and asks the exact wrong question. Is it trying to lead him somewhere? The answer is yes. The destination is a lich, and the orb's terms of service definitely did not disclose that. A close-up pins the orb in his palm, cold mist curling off it like a fishing link made physical, pretty, humming, and absolutely about to install malware in his itinerary. Ketal pushes through the leaves and tells the orb he is coming and to be silent. It is the first time he has verbally threatened a magical artifact, and it will not be the last. His fur-lined boot steps onto cracked ground, and he stops mid-stride with a curious hum. His assessment of the situation shifts from a minor detour to a possible raid. Ketal stands at the mouth of a dark cavern, 3 meters tall in a fur collar, and looks inside. Sensible adventurers would mark this location on a map and avoid it. A single glowing eye flares in the dark, horizontal blue cyan light, cutting through the black like a notification from a god, who definitely did not get consent to track his location. Ketal looks up at the voice and demands the speaker show himself. He has not yet learned who or what he is facing. Ghostly blue chains snap shut around him, and a colossal spectral figure materializes inside a frost-wreathed chamber. This is the hero panel, the moment the trap springs and the tourist realizes he walked into the final boss cutscene. Kartos Brenulis Kesses smiles with a skull, glowing blue eyes visible beneath a dark purple hood with gold trim. He calls Ketal a dumb barbarian, large enough to make a good offering. Then he drops the number that turns this from a random encounter into a serial case. This makes 10 now. The region's disappearances were not a mystery. They were a lich's grocery list. The narration pulls back to give us Kartos' origin story. He controlled the minds of kings, incited wars, toppled 5 kingdoms, and decided that immortality was the next logical career move. He became a lich, a soul bound to a life vessel, undying until that vessel breaks, and began planning his resurrection in a remote territory where no one would notice. The flashback shows him as a former world-dominating evil mage who became a lich and began plotting in secret. His plan requires a large number of human souls. Kartos exults in his growing power, arms raised in a candlelit chamber. The narration confirms he chose this secluded territory specifically to grow in secret. Wide shots show the peaceful Varkan countryside while Ketal, somewhere in a cavernous glow, reacts to the strange mystic energy. The contrast between the quiet territory and the horror beneath it is doing a lot of narrative lifting. Kartos casts a scrying projection in his palm and studies Ketal, dismissing him as probably just an ordinary soul immune to arcane detection by fluke, which is the lich equivalent of reading the first line of a Wikipedia article. Meanwhile, Ketal's own latent power stirs from a rock in the canyon, a teal glow waking up around him, and Kartos, still projecting, turns to address him directly with the classic villain opener, "O Barbarian." The orb in Kartos' hand displays Ketal's tiny silhouette trapped inside blue energy. It is a tracking visual, though the exact nature of the artifact remains unclear. Ketal arrives at the hidden location, says, "So this is the place," and forces open a heavy barred wooden door with a burst of purple energy. No lockpicks, no keys, just main character privilege applied to dungeon architecture. He steps onto a wooden platform overlooking a cracked stone floor, and his expression shifts to startled surprise the moment something inside catches him off guard. Ketal comes face to face with Kartos and nearly loses his mind with excitement. A real lich, the rank only the most extreme mages ever reach, the final evolution of every edgy wizard who ever said, "Death is merely a setback." The barbarian is fully nerding out. He surveys the chamber's scattered bones and skulls and pieces together. The scheme, this is how Kartos has been luring people here, one glowing orb at a time, like a fantasy world serial killer, with a very specific recruitment funnel. Kartos senses a high-grade artifact on Ketal blocking his magical detection and can't quite believe it. He concludes the oblivious barbarian just got absurdly lucky, stumbling onto something powerful enough to blind a lich's senses without even knowing what he's carrying. Kartos grins and admits the artifact is powerful enough to block even his senses. He says he does not know whether to be impressed or annoyed, then prepares to escalate. The artifact erupts with crackling purple electricity, and Kartos declares that if Ketal had quietly fallen under the spell, he could have died painlessly, a sales pitch that definitely does not land with the barbarian who is still standing there unbothered. Skeletal undead surge forward, and Kartos commands them with the casual authority of a man who has sent a lot of bone minions to their second death, my minions, delivered like he's introducing his LinkedIn network. Fast, a skeleton lunges. Ketal smiles. The scheme clicks into place for him. He gets what's going on now, and he meets the first undead rush head-on. Fast, a purple energy blast shatters the skeleton's ribcage, bones flying outward. The resistance is flimsier than Ketal expected, and he has not exerted himself. Ketal watches the disintegrating skeleton and remarks that the resistance was weaker than expected. An enraged Kartos summons more undead and reveals his actual goal. He needs Ketal captured alive, not dead, which means the Lich was never trying to kill him. He was trying to recruit him into a very permanent internship. Ketal punches a skeletal head aside. He keeps driving heavy blows into the undead. No reinforcements arrive. No swordmaster appears. The 3-meter fighter clears the room alone. Ketal punches Kartos directly. The two trade a violent exchange of blows and blasts. Ketal is thrown backward, then immediately recovers. Ketal rises from the scattered remains and blasts back with a surge of purple energy, declaring that Kassan was right. Destroy the head and the undead drop, which is the most wholesome callback to a thief who couldn't pick locks. He also notes that he expected a Lich to summon Death Knights or something stronger than the skeleton budget tier nonsense, a complaint that is both valid and deeply insulting to the undead middle management currently being dismantled. Kartos screams that he is done holding back and commands rise. The reaction shot reveals a skeleton knight. The skeleton knight is fully revealed, horned helmet, star motive plate armor, broadsword, and shield. Kartos, now in ornate armor himself, muses that a Lich-created skeleton knight might follow different rules from the usual undead, though he does not know what those rules are. Fast. Ketal grins that this fight will be interesting. The knight lunges into the clash as the axe combat peaks. Ketal unleashes purple-charged punches and a leaping strike. The knight's shield barely holds. Kartos casts another spell from the backline. The clash ends in a massive ground-shattering explosion of purple energy. Fast, Ketal charges through the purple mist and lands another decisive blow, remarking that this opponent is tougher than the rest. Kartos shouts in alarm and stares back menacingly as a dark-clad figure is blasted away. Ketal remains standing amid the ongoing battle. So the Lich set a trap, summoned an army, and raised a skeleton knight, and the barbarian is still mostly just rating the encounter difficulty. Next act, we find out why a motion control magic is about to have the worst product review of its unlife. The skeleton knight stands there in full horned helmet, star-plated glory, and the first thing this undead mid-boss does is make the whole room feel like a delayed boss cutscene. This is the moment the Lich stops sending interns and starts sending someone with a health bar that actually looks respectable. Kartos, now clad in ornate armor, raises his scepter to summon the knight. Ketal quietly hopes a Lich-made one might put up a fight this time. Ketal touches his chin, grins, and says this is finally going to be interesting. Fast, the knight lunges. Ketal meets it with a glowing fist. Both fighters clash head-on, testing raw strength. Fast, Kartos raises the skeleton knight. The shockwave from the summon blasts Kartos back. Splash damage hits the summoner. Fast, the knight charges again, hornhelm first. Ketal clenches his fist and readies a counter aimed at undead weak points. Fast. Ketal slashes through the air with a glowing blade of purple-white force, the corridor warping behind the strike, pure physicality doing the job of a legendary sword art. Fast. Kartos raises both hands from the backline and casts another spell. Fast. Ketal drives a punch into the knight, then leaps for a descending strike, 2 rapid hits before the knight can recover. Fast, the ground shatters under a purple explosion. Debris flies. The blast swallows both fighters and rips through the Varkan territory. Ketal charges through the purple mist, diagonal scar catching the light, eyes still steady. He lands another decisive blow and the dark-clad figure, knight or Lich, is launched through the haze. Kartos shouts in alarm as the fight turns against his creation. Ketal looks genuinely impressed and says, "Oh, this one is tougher than the rest," which, from him, is basically a 5-star review with a side of still not enough. Kartos glares back with all the menace a skull can manage, and Ketal answers with another energy strike, the conversational equivalent of "anyway, moving on." A figure in dark clothing with gold trim gets thrown backward through a flash of cyan light, and Ketal stands unharmed in the aftermath. Chapter 24 opens with Kartos getting slammed around by invisible force, while the narration recalls that the skeleton knight was created by the Lich. Fast. Ketal lands a devastating downward strike that drives the Lich into the ground. White and purple energy erupts at the point of impact, cracking the floor beneath them. Fast. Ketal follows with a purple beam, a brutal close-range strike, and another punch that detonates white-hot. 3 hits in quick succession. A split panel contrasts Ketal's dead calm face against Kartos screaming mid-attack. One man is doing his taxes, the other is pouring his entire soul into a spell that is not working. Ketal tilts his head and asks, "Is this all?" A direct dismissal of the enemy who brought down 5 kingdoms. Kartos laughs, then scans Ketal and finds no arcane signature at all. Not a flicker, not a trace, not even the artifact mana he was expecting. The Lich's internal monologue breaks. He took down a skeleton knight with nothing but raw physical strength. The world's math department is not returning his calls. Kartos decides Ketal is special, grips his staff, and commits to fighting him personally. The spell throws Ketal backward. He recovers mid-air. Purple energy swirls around him as he dives back in. A tense pause cuts to Ketal crouched beside the fallen skeleton knight's corpse, studying it warily. The tourist has quietly become a forensic investigator of his own violence. Kartos watches and notes the Barbarian was no exception, a confirmation that his emotion control theory is about to be tested on Ketal. Enraged, Kartos screams his full title, the sorcerer who brought down 5 kingdoms and clashed with heroes, Kartos Bernulus Kesses. Ketal, mid-combat, randomly remembers Elf Queen Marcelia Hassian Karushia's absurdly long name, because nothing says I am not intimidated, like mentally comparing royal naming conventions. Kartos follows the title drop with a violent surge of energy. The blast sends Ketal backward. The Lich is now throwing everything he has at him. Narration explains Kartos developed a unique, nearly invincible spell that barely costs mana. Kartos gloats that nothing stands a chance against such great magic, then privately admits something is off. Ketal isn't wearing any artifact that could explain why he's still standing. Kartos lunges with an energy wreath strike. Ketal counters with a searing white slash. The two trade blows in sustained melee. Kartos finally deploys his motion control spell, and it fails to take hold. He screams no, how, insisting it worked perfectly, while Ketal stands there like a pop-up blocker made flesh. Narration lays out the theory. Kartos' emotion control magic works on everyone because everyone carries some negativity deep down, theoretically unstoppable, however. Kartos, stunned Ketal, is still upright, insists his magic is not some low-tier spell, and Ketal shrugs it off as boring, the emotional equivalent of leaving a 1-star review with no text. Kartos chants an elaborate incantation about murky currents swallowing the world and drowning all clarity in chaos. He unleashes the spell in a blinding explosion, and Ketal watches with wide-eyed fascination, not fear, not panic, just a tourist who finally found a fireworks show worth the detour. The spell detonates across the battlefield, but Kartos reacts with shock rather than triumph, because Ketal is still standing, calm and unshaken, in the middle of the wreckage. Kartos is left gasping, visibly exhausted, and the Lich who toppled kingdoms is now out of breath from fighting one man who didn't even look winded. Kartos admits to himself he overdid it, having burned nearly all his mana just keeping his own body from falling apart. Ketal asks again, but is this all? And Kartos panics, screaming that even this spell doesn't work on him. The product demo has gone catastrophically off script. Kartos, panicking that Ketal's mind should have shattered completely, demands to know what he really is. Ketal says it was impressive, but he didn't feel anything from it, confirming total immunity to the emotion control magic with the politeness of a restaurant review. Kartos trails off mid-threat and flinches. Ketal clenches a fist wreathed in purple energy and advances. So the Skeleton Knight got promoted to mid-boss. The Lich emptied his entire spellbook, and the Barbarian is still mostly just rating the encounter difficulty. Next act, we find out what happens when a Lich realizes he picked the wrong tourist. We are now at the exact panel where a Lich who brought down 5 kingdoms is screaming no how, because his mind control spell just bounced off our protagonist like a notification he muted 3 years ago. Kartos Bernulus Kesses has decided Ketal is special and grips his staff with both hands, announcing that he will deal with this personally. He is stepping in directly rather than delegating the matter to subordinates. The spell throws Ketal backward. He recovers mid-leap and dives back into the clash. Purple energy swirls around him as he re-engages. A tense pause cuts to Ketal crouched beside the fallen Skeleton Knight, studying it with the wary focus of a tourist reading a warning label, while Kartos watches and quietly notes the Barbarian was no exception, a line that ages poorly in about 2 pages. Enraged, Kartos screams his full title, the great and mighty sorcerer who brought down 5 kingdoms and clashed with heroes, Kartos Bernulus Kesses, and Ketal, mid-fight, randomly remembers Elf Queen Marcelia Hassiane Karushia's equally absurd name, because ranking royal naming conventions is how he copes with stress. The title drop hits. A violent surge of energy blasts Ketal backward. The Lich pours everything into the attack, trying to make the strike stick. Narration explains Kartos developed a unique, nearly invincible spell that barely costs mana, the kind of ability that gets banned in ranked play, and the Lich gloats that nothing stands a chance against such great magic. Then Kartos privately admits something's off. Ketal is not wearing any artifact that could explain why he's still standing. which means the Lich is now troubleshooting a bug in what he thought was his undefeated build. Kartos lunges with an energy-wreathed strike. Ketal counters with a searing white slash of force. They trade blows. The ground shudders and cracks under the exchange. He spots the ornate purple jug and identifies it as a probable life vessel. He plans to ask Rosa to appraise it later. He catches himself reacting with alarm, muttering that he has already gathered enough rewards for one dungeon. Kartos finally deploys his mind control spell, and it fails so completely that he screams, "No, how?" while Ketal stands there unaffected, a pop-up blocker made flesh, a man whose inner settings menu has no despair toggle. He finds unconscious or dead victims inside, a woman in a blue coat, a man in a gray tunic, and a blonde woman in a purple hat. The lineup confirms the disappearances were real. Ketal touches his chin, then decides the matter is beyond him and resolves to report it at the guild. Narration lays out the theory. Kartos' emotion control magic works on everyone because everyone carries some negativity deep down. Theoretically unstoppable, however, and Ketal shrugs the whole thing off as boring, which is a 1-star review with no text. Kartos is stunned that Ketal is still upright. He indignantly insists his magic is not some low-tier spell. It is a defensive clarification made just before the fight turns against him. Kartos chants an elaborate incantation about murky currents swallowing the world and drowning all clarity in chaos. The build-up consumes a massive amount of mana. He unleashes his most powerful spell in a blinding explosion. Ketal watches with wide-eyed fascination, not fear. The spell detonates across the battlefield in a mess of purple and white light. He remains fixed on the display as it unfolds. Ketal produces the purple jug and cheerfully announces he brought back what looks like the Lich's life vessel. Rosa's shock is so intense, it gets its own close-up with sweat beads and a red sound effect, and once the first captain of the guard is summoned, he gets the same grave realization. A barbarian just walked in holding a Lich's phylactery like a souvenir mug. Kartos admits to himself that he overdid it, having burned nearly all his mana just keeping his own body from falling apart, and Ketal asks again, but is this all? The most devastating thing you can say to a villain after his final boss phase? Kartos panics. He screams that even this doesn't work, then demands to know what he's even facing. He gets no answer. Ketal says it was impressive, sure, but he did not feel anything from it, confirming total immunity to the emotion control magic with the politeness of a restaurant review that still ruins a career. Kartos trails off mid-threat, flinches, and Ketal clenches a fist wreathed in purple energy and advances. The Lich has run out of phases, out of minions, and out of excuses, and the barbarian who killed the Lich is about to make that title literal. The Lich's last play is the oldest trick in the villain handbook. If you can't win the body, invade the mind. Kartos has dragged Ketal into a psychic arena, where he vows to shatter the barbarian's blades and rule the world once more, except the arena turns out to be a place even the Lich cannot look at without losing sanity. Kartos opens with the confident grin of a man who has read his own wiki page, while Ketal stands there in chibi confusion, surrounded by floating sheep and question marks, the visual equivalent of, "Sir, this is a Wendy's." The inner world fight escalates through fragmented flashes, Ketal straining against chains, Kartos declaring world domination, and sparring match memories cutting in without transition. None of these images resolve cleanly because the collapsing battlefield itself is the immediate threat. A glowing purple amphora, the suspected life vessel, materializes in the chaos, and the clash peaks with a barrier of radiant energy that throws one of the combatants back. Ketal's eyes go blank white, the bystander expression of someone who just realized the room is on fire, but the fire is also him. Ketal watches glowing liquid pour from the floating vessel, and calmly narrates that once a Lich commits to this form, he's stuck in it forever, tourism guide energy even during a psychic possession. Kartos, meanwhile, finally notices the architecture where he actually is. The first captain of the guard presses Ketal for the truth. Ketal faces him with steady patience, having answered the same question multiple times already. In the psychic wreckage, Kartos concludes that Ketal is an Empire-forged assassin bred to kill him. He vows to overturn the Empire itself before he is finished. The threat carries no more weight than his earlier words. Kartos concedes the Empire couldn't create something like this. mocks his own defeated black energy attack as kind of cool, but ultimately just that, and reflects on being a lich, supposedly a mage's final evolution, before lying defeated on the psychic floor. Final evolution, first round exit. Victorious, Ketal declares that liches in this world are not that impressive, then immediately pivots to the important part, loot. He grabs the wooden staff topped with a blue gem and wonders if holding it lets him cast magic, the eternal question of every strength-build player who finds an intelligence weapon. Then he spots the ornate purple jug and identifies it as a probable life vessel, planning to ask Rosa to appraise it later. He notes to himself that he has probably gathered enough rewards for one dungeon already. Ketal explores a glowing arcane summoning seal inside Lich Cardis's hidden sacrificial chamber, a location the text box labels twice. The chamber is filled with purple mist and occult geometry, and the atmosphere signals serious danger. He finds unconscious or dead victims inside, a woman in a blue coat, a man in a gray tunic, a blonde woman in a purple hat, the kind of lineup that confirms the disappearances were not a rumor. Ketal stands there doing the finger-to-chin thinking pose before deciding this one's above his pay grade and heading back to report it himself. Ketal, still shown in a small contemplative pose, stays wary as a serpentine coiled creature remains visible at the edge of the panel. The room remains a threat. Cut to the Barbarian Adventurers Guild. The doorbell rings, and Rosa looks up to see Ketal walking toward her desk like a returning client, respect and enthusiasm this time, instead of the usual terrified stares. Ketal smiles, crosses his arms, and says he had some things to deal with, the most understated way anyone has ever described killing a lich. Rosa's confusion is immediate and visible. She has not yet received the patch notes for this conversation. Rosa dismisses the claim that a lich, one of only 5 in the entire world, could be hiding in a backwater place. Her expression shows she is humoring him. Her reaction is about to shift. Ketal produces the purple jug and cheerfully announces he brought back what looks like the lich's life vessel. Rosa's shock is so intense it gets its own close-up with sweat beads and a red sound effect. The first captain of the guard arrives with the grave realization of a man who just watched his entire threat assessment model walk through the door holding the lich's phylactery like a souvenir mug. The estate is having a normal day, and then the Sun God's Hours department kicks the door in. But before the Inquisitor arrives, the purple jug tips over and spills the one thing worse than lich wine people. Victims, tied to all those disappearances Cardos was so proud of. The skeleton's own words hang in the air, several disappearances in the territory, and not one of them ever found, and Rosa bolts out of her chair to call for someone immediately. News hits the local authorities. A soldier shouts, "A lich, you say," with the energy of a man whose entire threat assessment training just got deleted. Ketal gets introduced to officials who look like they would rather be anywhere else. The officials confirm the name, Kartos Branulus Kesses, the sorcerer who drove kings mad and ravaged kingdoms. The panel even gives us a puppet string visual, because the Lichel's whole brand was emotional manipulation with executive reach. The first captain presses Ketal for the truth, and Ketal faces him with steady patience, having already answered this question 3 times. Ketal dismisses further questioning. He has nothing more to add. The officials around him absorb the implications of a barbarian defeating a 5-kingdom lich alone in their territory. Cut to Lord Luke Farkin's estate, where the man is having the worst realization a local noble can have. A lich was operating right next to his territory, and he did not get a memo. His advisors name the recovered vessel the phylactery, with the kind of hushed dread people usually reserve for tax audits, and warn that the Empire may dispatch investigators any moment now. This is no longer a local problem. A household elder frets that Swordmaster Kane is away from the estate at the worst possible time. Their strongest asset is not here to handle the barbarian. Lord Varkan calls the affair a headache, while a soldier quietly credits the barbarian with finding the phylactery. The narrative shifts. Ketal's no longer a strange visitor. He is the man who solved the case. The council decides Ketal's feat deserves a fitting reward, though the Lord stares out the window, wondering if the estate's budget can survive giving one to a man who just killed a lich as a side quest. A maid bursts in with unwelcome news. The Sun God's Inquisitor, Aquaz, has arrived at the estate unannounced. Lord Varkan is alarmed. The doors swing open and Aquaz steps through like a surprise comeback stage. Long light purple hair, red eyes, ceremonial robes, and enough divine authority to make the furniture feel underdressed. Lord Varkan formally introduces himself as Luke Varkan, Lord of the Varkan estate, while elsewhere Melina Akasha sits through a separate business meeting calculating how her mercenary just became continent relevant. Aquaz gets her title card, Inquisitor of the Sun God. The channel introduces her with clear weight before she has even spoken a full sentence. Aquaz opens with the driest possible observation. The estate has been rather noisy lately. That is Inquisitor speak for, I know something happened, and I am waiting to see who lies about it first. Lord Varkan wonders aloud if she is not here about the Lich after all, then formally asks the reason for her visit, while Ketal stands nearby in perfect silence. The barbarian who killed a Lich is now the quietest person in the room. Then comes the pivot. Aquaz says, however, and asks to hear more about what happened recently in this estate, shifting the subject from the Lich to the person who killed it. As the Lord recounts the incident, a vivid image of Kartos in his necromantic robes flashes up, startling Aquaz so badly the recovered vessel nearly crashes down on her. She grips her sun pendant like a stress toy. The chapter closes with Aquaz looming over the seated Lord pressing the same question again. In this estate, she already knows the answer. She wants to see if he does. Chapter 27 opens with the news spreading. Melina Akasha reacts with disbelief. That barbarian defeated Kartos. Is something like that even possible and honestly fair? She hired a mercenary, not a Lich removal service. Aquaz is startled too, which is notable because her role as Inquisitor requires her to show no surprise. Aquaz confirms Ketal is from the White Wastelands, and her mind immediately goes to the demon realm. The theory clicks. Maybe the barbarian himself is the reason she was sent here, not the Lich at all. She concludes in private that Ketal might be her actual assignment while her public face stays composed. She is managing two conversations at once, and neither is casual. A brief flash shows Ketal and Swordmaster Kane mid-clash, then cuts back to Ketal examining the glowing blue gem from Kartos' staff. He decides to ask a mage about it later rather than identify it himself. Ketal senses it is about time to move, and the first captain informs him the destination is the church, reassuring him not to worry, which is a funny thing to say to a man who just soloed a Lich. Ketal declares, "Let us be off," and the group departs, while narration notes that gods bestow power directly and may even descend in person. This is not casual world building. It foreshadows divine intervention. They arrive at the sun god's church. The cathedral has vaulted ceilings, rose windows, and a purple to gold glow throughout the interior. Ketal looks up at the sun god's church and says, "The sun god's church? Whoa!" with genuine wonder, overwhelmed that the divine world he prayed for is now standing before him in full grandeur. The first captain tells him someone will guide him inside, and Ketal accepts with a calm reply as they pass statues and empty sunlit pews. He is being led through the church like any other visitor. A procession of nuns in white habits and sun pendants passes by, and Aquaz finally meets Ketal face to face for a formal introduction. An onlooker remarks on how young the Inquisitor is, implying the kingdom's divine authority is vested in someone very young. Aquaz begins questioning Ketal about the recent dungeon incident and Kartos' crimes, framing them as grave atrocities across the world. Ketal recalls it differently. To him, Kartos was a Lich who destroyed himself in the course of the fight. Aquaz's skepticism cast doubt on Ketal's story, because nothing says thank you for saving us like an Inquisitor implying the Lich defeated himself and you were just nearby. Ketal insists he can only speak to what he witnessed, and someone proposes a divine lie detection method. Ketal agrees without concern, having nothing to hide and no clear understanding of what he is accepting. Ketal agrees to proceed without hesitation. Why would that bother me? While Aquaz insists she has not told a single lie. Both statements are about to be tested by a god. Aquaz begins the ritual, praying to the sun god to descend and judge. A golden magic circle manifests beneath her, and the room fills with blinding golden light. A blinding pillar of golden light descends on the cathedral, and Ketal reacts in genuine shock as the sun god manifests, a massive featureless silhouette filled with a swirling star galaxy pattern. This is not an illusion or symbolic vision. A deity has physically appeared for a direct confrontation. The ritual concludes, and the sun god's detected emotion toward Ketal is revealed as confusion. Not anger, not approval, confusion. Even the divine algorithm does not know what file type this man is. Ketal stands amid the fading divine light, and Aquaz clutches her sun pendant with visible unease. He just looks at her and says, "Got it," as if the sun god's confusion is a perfectly normal customer service outcome. A blinding pillar of golden light tears down through the cathedral roof, and for one long moment the sun god itself actually shows up to the meeting, because when a barbarian kills a lich, apparently the divine middle management has to verify the paperwork personally. What steps out of the light has no face, no voice, and no fixed form, only a featureless silhouette containing a swirling galaxy. Its presence is overwhelming, vast enough to overturn every assumption about the divine. And the emotion the sun god registers toward Ketal is not wrath, not mercy, not even the standard divine disappointment. It is confusion. The highest deity on the continent looked at this man and got the spiritual equivalent of a 404 error. Aqua stands there clutching her sun pendant like it might start giving her better news, and Ketal, still bathed in fading godlight, just looks at her and says, "Got it." Aquas gives a restrained response to the divine encounter. Ketal once thanked a receptionist for a silver coin with more visible emotion. We will circle back to how we got here, because the news is already spreading. Melina Akasha hears that the barbarian defeated Kardos, and her face says what everyone is thinking. That is not the mercenary package she paid for. Aquas confirms that Ketal is from the White Wastelands. The information visibly reframes her mission. Perhaps the Lich was never the true objective. Perhaps the barbarian himself is the real target of her investigation. Brief flashback to Ketal sparring with Swordmaster Cain. Return to the present. Ketal is holding the glowing blue gem from Kardos' staff and examining it without understanding what it is. He decides to ask a mage about the gem later. A knight tells him it is time to go, and the destination is the Church of the Sun God. Ketal declares, "Let us be off," and the narration quietly drops one of those lines that sounds like flavor text until it pays off. Gods in this world bestow power directly, and they may even descend in person. They arrive at the Sun God's church. The interior is imposing, vaulted ceilings, rose windows, and a purple to gold glow that marks the church as wealthy and influential. Ketal looks up with pure wonder. This is the fantasy world he longed for when he was an ordinary office worker. A guide is waiting inside, and Ketal accepts with a calm, "Ah, all right." They pass statues and empty pews. A procession of nuns in white habits moves through the church, and the full ritual atmosphere surrounds Ketal as he walks. Aquaz and Ketal finally introduce themselves, face to face. She is the inquisitor of the sun god, all ceremonial robes and sun pendant and deliberate authority. He is Ketal the barbarian, smiling like he is at a meet and greet. An onlooker whispers that Aquaz is surprisingly young. People usually assume divine authority comes with age. Aquaz notices Ketal smiling and looks suspicious. Most defendants do not appear happy to be in court. A church official begins the formal questioning about the recent dungeon incident. Kardos, he notes, committed grave atrocities across the world, a record that frames the Lich as a serious global threat rather than a local monster. Then the official reads another account claiming Kardos was just a Lich flailing about on his own who ended up destroying himself. The implication is clear. Ketal did not so much defeat the Lich as happened to be nearby while the Lich had a bad day. Ketal insists he can only speak to what he saw, which is a very polite way of saying he was there and the Lich very much was not flailing alone. The room lands on the idea of a divine lie detection ritual. Ketal's response is basically, like a divine lie detector, with the enthusiasm of a man who has nothing to hide and no idea what he is volunteering for. He calls it the perfect chance to experience divine power himself, because Ketal's tourism itinerary now apparently includes get scanned by a god. The room is unsettled by how excited he looks. Swordmaster Cain asks if the ritual makes Ketal uncomfortable. Ketal shrugs it off. It does not bother him. Aquaz adds that she has not told a single lie. unaware that the deity's presence may test that claim. Aquas closes her eyes and begins the ritual, praying to the one who watches from the highest place and oversees the sun itself. The tone shifts. This is no longer a bureaucratic interview, but a direct communion with the divine. A golden magic circle erupts beneath Aquas. The room flashes white. The cathedral roof opens onto something vast and beyond the power of everyone present. The pillar of light descends. Ketal looks up in genuine shock and asks what this is, because even he did not expect the sun god to appear in person. Then the presence manifests, massive star-filled beyond the light itself. The visuals escalate sharply. This is the image the whole act has been building toward. The ritual reads the god's emotion, and the answer comes back confusion. Not condemnation, not blessing, just the divine equivalent of I do not know what I am looking at. Aquas's face tightens. She grips her pendant harder. The most powerful inquisitor on the continent has just received a one-word response from her god, and that response is confusion. And Ketal, still sitting there in the afterglow, just says, "Got it." That is his entire debrief. The sun god manifested, scanned him, and got confused. And Ketal's response is the same energy as confirming a restaurant reservation. Chapter 28 opens with Kardos's ghostly vestige mocking the dungeon clear process, then cuts to Aquas framing the real test. Ketal survived once by chance, but now the divine audit begins in earnest. Aquas tells the room it is fine and to go ahead. Melina swallows nervously. Ketal stands with his arms crossed, waiting on the outcome with restrained patience. Aquas reacts with shock when she realizes Ketal really came from the White Wastelands. Ketal calmly confirms it, and for the first time the Inquisitor looks less like an interrogator and more like someone who just found the file she was actually looking for. Aquas admits she had personal business here. Ketal asks directly whether that business was confirming if he is an unholy being. He asks calmly, as if it were a routine matter. Golden energy swirls around Ketal, and the declaration comes, no falsehood is permitted. Aquas denies that is the whole reason, but the denial sounds nervous even to the mortals in the room. An acolyte kneels under a beam of light. Aquas apologizes for hiding her intentions. Ketal says he has one more question. Aquas grips her sun pendant and starts to say what the divine revelation was, then trails off. The panel censors the actual content, which means the god's answer is so spicy even the Manhwa won't show it directly. The scene shifts. Melina gazes out a window alone. Elsewhere, Lord Luke Varkin stands before a Gothic doorway, preparing for a difficult political conversation. The Domain Lord presses Aquas on what kind of being Ketal is. She states flatly that he is a barbarian from the White Wastelands. The Lord responds with skepticism, asking if that is really true. The Lord worries aloud that if this gets out, the world will be in an uproar. Aquas reassures him they plan to keep the matter of the barbarian quiet too, because nothing says we value your service like a coordinated cover-up. Lord Varkin wonders aloud whether all wasteland barbarians are like Ketal. Aquas says no. If they were, they'd have already left the snowfield and conquered the world. The Lord agrees, noting ordinary barbarians pair immense strength with an innate streak of stupidity, some limitation Ketal apparently skipped in character creation. Aquas tells the Lord she's heard Ketal has both strength and intellect, and that the current king of the barbarians, whom she's actually met, is likewise unlike typical barbarians. The Lord muses a meeting between the two could be interesting. Aquas shuts the idea down flat. The Lord admits he could not say the same, and Aquas says this is not something to laugh about. She needed to meet Ketal alone to confirm something, and that something, she finally states, was whether he is a pure human or something merely mimicking one. The Lord reacts with bewilderment, asking what that revelation was. The panel withholds the answer again, delaying the sun god's actual verdict. The scene shifts to the throne room, where Lord Varkan formally greets someone with a "doing well, I hope," that absolutely no one believes is casual. Ketal has been summoned, and he opens with his usual directness. "So, what did you call me here for this time?" The Lord, as the local ruler, says he has something to say, and starts by thanking Ketal formally. He admits the small domain would have fallen immediately without Ketal's intervention. Ketal has slumped into a chair, nearly unconscious. Formal gratitude from nobility overwhelms him. Ketal asks, "Sorry for what?" because he genuinely does not understand why anyone would apologize for thanking him. Then the Lord explains the real problem. If the Emperor finds out Ketal defeated Kartos, he will act personally. Swordmaster Cain advises that it is better for Ketal to give up the glory he deserves, and Ketal shrugs that he does not particularly mind. The man just soloed a Lich, and his main concern is not whether he gets credit, it is whether the paperwork is annoying. A gloved hand taps an old ledger, then reaches for Ketal's shoulder. Ketal reacts with wide-eyed shock. The Lord is about to give him something, and Ketal is already preparing to receive it. The Lord presents a small, sparkling pouch and says it is not ordinary leather. It is a dimensional storage pouch which allows a 3-meter barbarian to carry items within it. And the first thing Ketal is going to do, because we already know this man, is test it by putting his axe inside. The barbarian who killed a Lich just got his first magical item, and he is about to use it like a lunchbox. The blonde woman tilts her head, smiles, and states that she has decided. A purple glowing claw the size of a dinner table lunges at Ketal's face, and the chapter cuts to black before he can even look surprised. Welcome to the end game of the act, where the friendly village girl was secretly a raid boss the whole time. The classic massively multiplayer online role-playing game social encounter, executed flawlessly. And that is when the raid actually started. We'll circle back to how we got here, but first, the barbarian who killed a Lich needs to figure out why everyone keeps disappearing. Chapter 29 opens with Lord Varkan handing Ketal the dimensional storage pouch, and Ketal holds it with clear reverence, having received his first genuine magical item. The Lord explains the pouch works according to the size of the pocket space, and Ketal, who has spent years carrying everything by hand, realizes this is the first artifact he has ever seen in person. Even if an item is bigger than the leather opening, it can still go inside. So Ketal tests the rules by placing his enormous double-headed axe on the table and watching it vanish into the bag. The pouch swallows the axe. Ketal reacts with the pure joy of a man whose inventory management has just been solved, and the Lord smiles like a parent who bought the right birthday gift. Lord Varkan says he likes it. He will make good use of it, and he is glad Ketal is happy, which is the most wholesome reaction a noble has had to anything in this series so far. Then the tone shifts hard. A crimson-lit vision shows Ketal and Swordmaster Cain facing each other like predators, and Cain says something strange is happening in the world. A robed voice warns that it will descend here and spread across the world, while an ordinary market square keeps buying bread and tending children, completely unaware of the purple glow creeping at the panel's edge. Two townsmen react in shock that a search party did not return, and the panel cuts to marching soldiers in a violet battlefield where Ketal and Cain brace for something neither of them can name yet. The soldiers did not return, the scouts did not return, and the only thing coming from that direction is a steadily worsening sense of dread. Back at the Barbarian Adventurers Guild, Rosa flags an urgent dispatch request from the Lord. Simple work, but the reward is unusually large, which is never a good sign in this economy. Ketal accepts with a confident grin, resting his chin on his fist, showing no reluctance toward the dispatch request. The party starts assembling in a grassy field, and the first familiar face is a nun in a dark habit, Hayes, the cleric of Calosia, standing quietly while Ketal's furred shoulder enters the frame beside her. Hayes looks up, surprised to see him. Ketal says he had new gear made. He notes that even a barbarian who killed a Lich understands the value of proper equipment. Hayes examines an item Ketal is holding and calls it a unique design, then asks directly whether he also accepted this request, her tone indicating resignation rather than surprise. A memory panel flashes back to Alessandro and Kassan, the other two misfits from the dungeon arc, and Hayes guesses they probably refused the job. The gathered adventurers note there are fewer than 10 people total who accepted, and Ketal comments that the request itself is not complicated, just underattended, which is the kind of optimism that gets people killed. Hayes explains the reward is large because of a rumor that the guards sent out have not returned, and Ketal admits he expected at least 10 volunteers to show up. Hayes hints there is another rumor spreading, then smiles in a way that suggests she knows exactly what it is and would rather not say it out loud in polite company. A brief vision cuts to Melina among flowers, then to a robed figure gasping the name Aqua, and finally to a ceremonial robed figure identified as the Solar God's heretic inquisitor. A distant voice announces that the inquisitor will accompany the party on this request. The announcement means the Sun God Church is taking the disappearances seriously. It also indicates the church may be taking Ketal seriously. Hayes reacts with visible shock that Ketal is apparently friends with the heretic inquisitor. Ketal walks up smiling and introduces Aquaz. He presents the introduction as an ordinary meeting. Aquaz is startled. Ketal greets her with a cheerful hello, and then flatly denies that they are friends, which is somehow both rude and completely accurate. Ketal laughs heartily while Aquaz glances at him with the expression of a woman reconsidering her entire career, and Melina steps in to smooth things over before the political tension becomes a diplomatic incident. A tall woman informs Aquaz that the others are currently on a rest period. Melina sighs with relief, and Hayes looks startled as the full group finally gathers in the town square. The armored escort formally welcomes all participants who accepted the request, and the expedition is officially launched. Ketal, Hayes, Melina, Aquaz, and a small contingent of guards riding toward an unknown threat. Chapter 30 finds the expedition traveling together through a sunlit forest. Ketal remarks that being gathered like this feels just like going on a raid, a genuinely social observation from a man who spent years alone in a frozen wasteland. A voice says the god did not reveal the exact time of the coming danger, and Melina tries to keep everyone calm by suggesting it might just be something simple, like the village losing contact. Melina's optimism is immediately undercut by a vision of a silver-haired young man grinning about a great evil, while a white-haired woman recounts a divine warning: evil will descend. The party arrives at the outskirts of a quiet, timber-framed village. The streets are empty in the worst possible way, not destroyed, not burned, just vacant. A soldier confirms they have reached the village entrance. Melina asks a knight for his read on the area. He reports that he senses nothing at all, which is somehow more alarming than sensing danger. A cloaked figure speculates the villagers simply ran away, but the search commander orders his men to spread out and look for tracks, because an entire population does not evaporate on a whim. Another soldier insists it is impossible for every villager to vanish without leaving a single trace, and Ketal stands nearby with the patient expression of a man who has already seen several impossible things this season. Inside an abandoned house, searchers find an untouched slice of cake and a still-steaming bowl on the table, and a blonde soldier calls his captain over in clear panic. The captain tries to calm him down, but the soldier insists the food was just prepared and is still warm, which means whoever lived here left mid-meal. The search parties confirm that not one earlier scout returned, and there is no sign of anyone leaving or hiding, only signs of life with no trace of humans. Close-ups of untouched bread and simmering stew drive the point home, while a shadowy figure with glowing purple eyes looms in the background. A search party member reports it is the same everywhere, homes intact, belongings in place, but no people anywhere, and the group confers in the town square under a sky that has taken on an unhealthy purple tint. Melina is questioned by an armored figure and denies knowing anything, while Ketal reports he has not found any real traces either and does not sense any presence. Swordmaster Kane grumbles that the situation is maddening, and for a Transcendent swordsman to say that out loud, the situation has officially crossed into "we are not okay" territory. Soldiers suddenly shout that there is another one, and the alarm spreads fast through a village where no one should be. Melina begins glowing with a bright white aura that unsettles the onlookers, who whisper, asking who that woman is, and Melina herself smiles and says, "This is interesting." A stranger suddenly grabs a woman by the wrist in a village courtyard, and a blonde woman remarks slyly that even the sun god's inquisitor did not notice whatever is happening here. Swordmaster Kane dryly comments that someone has not wakened to mysteries, indicating the hidden threat is beyond the other's understanding. A mysterious brown-haired woman smiles and asks who they are. Ketal looks at her and observes that this is an unexpected harvest. Soldiers scramble and shout for everyone to spread out. The atmosphere shatters into panic. The villagers who are not villagers drop their disguise and attack. A soldier confronts Melina, who brushes it off with a strained smile and a dismissive laugh, while her body is still glowing with white light. A purple-haired woman marvels that even the inquisitor of the highest existing church could not detect this, and Aquas concludes it is either something not evil at all, or evil so high-ranking that detection is impossible. A blonde woman wistfully says she would have liked to see Aquas's domain, then tilts her head, smiles, and announces that she has decided, and the panel holds on that smile like a loaded weapon. She transforms into a demonic woman with white hair, black horns wrapped in silver chains, and a grin full of sharp teeth, and a massive purple-clawed hand lunges straight at Ketal's chest. And that is when the raid actually started.